Brian Vaughn and Van Lee are two friends and lifelong Star Wars fans, but their love of George Lucas's Space Baby is not the same. For Van, his obsessive fandom allowed him to win the 2019 Star Wars Trivia in the Park contest in Springfield, Missouri, where his defeat of a man who brought a 2-liter of Diet Mountain Dew to a 1-hour event is local legend. For Brian, he thinks it's okay to call clone troopers stormtroopers. It's here that their fandom collides as the duo watch and comment on the movies, shows, and stories as only one nerd and one super nerd can. It's Podcast, A Star Wars Story. Welcome, everyone, to Podcast, A Star Wars Story. I'm your host, Van Lee of Bootu, Inc. I'm joined in the studio today by Brian Vaughn, my co-host for Podcast, A Star Wars Story. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I am terrific. We have one episode under our belt in which we talk about Star Wars at large, so go check that out before you listen to this if you want. But I'd also like to correct you, Van. I am Grand Moff Brian Vaughn, as was established in that episode.
Yeah, you know, I just, for whatever reason, I can't remember you as a Grand Moff.
It's even on both my name tag and my desk placard.
And you're wearing that Imperial Navy outfit. It's kind of amazing.
Well, okay, to be fair, I was sort of wearing this before I got the job.
You just wear it out and about.
Yeah.
You dress for the job you want.
Exactly, not the job you have. The job I had was just regular Moff. Like a moth to flame, I wanted that promotion.
Well, you hit on a good point. You should go check out that very first episode we did. We introduced ourselves. We talk about our love for Star Wars and how it influenced us growing up. Today is the very first true episode of Podcast, A Star Wars Story. We're covering Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. We kind of touched earlier on that extra show about how you should view the series. How do you feel that we are starting for this podcast at Episode 1?
So we're going straight through numerically in chronological order here, episodes 1 through 9, and then we'll cover the side movies. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
I like this approach a lot, especially being familiar with the material, being older and not having to cope with the differences in film over the course of the, almost 50 years of Star Wars existing.
Years. Yeah.
But ultimately, and you can hear this on this previous episode we recorded, but we both agree there's really not a bad way to do it.
Yeah, it's just however you want to watch these shows, but consuming this podcast, you're going to have to go 1 through 9.
Yeah.
That's how it works. We control the narrative here.
With the Force.
Now,
is that what we use?
I mean, I don't know what you use.
Is it just our release and recording schedule that controls it?
That's called the Force, though. The Force of Sergio, our sound guy, able to release our stuff. Now, before we get into the movie details, I want to talk just a little bit about our personal details and experiences with Episode 1 specifically.
Oh, not our other personal details?
I mean, we can. We can talk about our loves and what we hope for in the future. What are your dreams? What's your 5-year plan?
Okay, within the next 5 years, I would like to have probably recorded a podcast about all of the different Star Wars stuff.
That's an achievable goal.
On our other podcast, Boob 2 Boys, I'd like, at some point within the next 5 years, to have talked about Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. That's my other big life goal.
Also an attainable goal.
Mm-hmm.
I once again commend you for setting the goalpost a little ways down, but not too far.
No, it's within reach. I can kick that far.
So I want to ask, do you remember the very first time you watched Episode 1, Phantom Menace? The thoughts, the feelings you had?
I sure do. This is actually because the original trilogy came out before we were born and was consumed via home viewing. Episode 1 was the first theater experience, the first big theater experience. Holy shit, there's a new Star Wars movie out. We were 14 at the time of its release, and I was very excited, although unfortunately not as excited as I would have been even like a year prior, due to personal circumstances, which is my parents were separating around this time. Life was very confusing. I wasn't appropriately excited when I eventually saw the movie with my dad, my sister, my stepbrother, and my stepmom.
Big family outing.
We went and saw this thing, and I, of course, really enjoyed it because I was 14 and it's a Star Wars movie. The only things that stuck out for me as negatives were this doesn't quite feel like what I want a Star Wars thing to feel like. I didn't think of it in those terms then. I was 14. I think it just didn't have that anything can happen, anything can look any way feel of the original trilogy. And then, of course, I really, really was aggravated by Jar Jar Binks. Because let me set the record straight. I was a moody teenager.
We all were.
Yeah, listening to Jar Jar Binks was not the remedy to that.
Very grating to you.
Yeah, very grating. Now, I've got the negatives out of the way. I, of course, had a blast watching the movie. I thought Darth Maul was a really, really cool villain. I was, of course, impressed by Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, who I was just beginning to kind of learn that they were actors in other things around that time also, as a teenager interested in movies. So, yeah, it's a really memorable experience seeing it for the first time, but also just all the buildup around the release of it and after the media attention, all of it.
Did you know there's still a Pepsi machine somewhere in, I think, Illinois? That's a Star Wars Episode 1 Pepsi machine. It has Anakin with the goggles on.
Wow.
It's amazing.
That's not far from us. We should go visit it.
We should trek out to Mecca, is what you're saying here, for our religion. I think you were, well, I don't think, I know you were more advanced than I was brain-wise as a kid. You were becoming a mental adult far faster than I was. And I was a couple of years behind in that regard.
Well, you are 6 months younger. Let's be fair about that.
Because I'm such a baby compared to you. So I remember going to the theater and loving it. I don't really remember any negatives. I don't remember any thoughts on Jar Jar. I can tell you based on how I used to act that I probably was just like, whatever, it's just Star Wars, fine.
Knowing you at the time, I will back that up. I think whatever is probably exactly what you thought about it.
But I do agree with, look, Darth Maul was awesome. That was badass. I really like Qui-Gon Jinn. I thought he was a cool Jedi, and I just enjoyed the movie. I thought it was great. I didn't really come out of the theater thinking, God, that sucks, until people started to tell me that. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of glummed onto that because you just do if you're in a society.
You definitely do.
That movie was bad.
And sometimes it can be a case of, oh, you know what? These are problems with this movie that would have been revealed to me upon future viewings, as some of those episode 1 problems are.
Yes.
But there are other problems with franchises where some of the deep level fans are so eager to complain that it can taint like a kid trying to get into a thing's experience when they encounter that.
Overall, what I think, in case you couldn't guess by my tone so far, is that I think episode 1 in particular, but the prequel series as a whole, gets a bad rap. Not necessarily wrongfully so, because there are valid criticisms to be had. However, I think it goes a little too far. Mm-hmm. And for example, there's a guy that I was talking with on Twitter who's in the fantasy baseball industry I've been in for years. And I literally was saying that typically when you find people who just regurgitate things about Star Wars, they're not super into it or whatever.
Yeah, who just want to spit the same takes out or whatever.
It's just the prequels sucked. Okay, why Jar Jar bad? That's
yes.
It. And I do not accept Jar Jar bad anymore. It is true.
What you're saying was my 14-year-old cineast's opinion of that. That has become more nuanced as I became an adult. So I'm with you. I think opinions like that are just kind of lazy at this point in time, and more just kind of a blanket like, hey, oh, this is a cultural thing. Here's my opinion. I've got to say it instead of just not saying anything.
I also do think, and this is the thing that I'm going to say, it's going to get people mad. I think if you released episode 1 now, same plot, obviously updated CGI or whatever, I think people would think it's just another Marvel movie. Because that's what these tend to be. I don't see that you can watch random Thor movie, even though I like several of the Thor movies, and just be like, this is a masterpiece, but oh man, episode 1 was the worst thing I've ever seen.
Well, you were hitting on the real problem, I think, which is a lot of the complaints people have about the prequels are Star Wars complaints at large to me. They'll think a thing is silly. Even Jar Jar, that's an annoying character, but the existence of such a character, not out of line in the Star Wars universe at all. All you can really say is like, oh, this character doesn't work for me. There's not a marked difference in quality to the point where you can say, these are bad, awful, unwatchable Star Wars movies, which is how a lot of people treat the material, as if the gulf between Return of the Jedi and episode 1 is so large as to render it just unwatchable.
I definitely agree with that. Well, let's talk some movie facts. So this is just overarching about the film, episode 1. And I don't want to cover too much of this stuff because the actual movie is where the fun is going to be. This is where the fun begins, Brian. But I will toss some facts and stats your way.
This is pod racing.
And this, literally, from a film standpoint, is one of, if not the most groundbreaking films that has ever been made, in the sense that this kind of epic with CGI, with this kind of camera work, this kind of involvement didn't happen. And this is before Lord of the Rings, which is the Lord of the Rings,
which
the
is
first
2 years later,
is the culmination of what George Lucas did with this. He was the first to do this kind of digital filmmaking, pioneered a lot of this stuff. Whether or not you agree with the movie being good, that's fine. That's not relevant to this conversation.
No, this is technical ingenuity.
And it's amazing. So I think at the very least you can say that about it.
I think that's a continuation. He just had more money of what Lucas was able to do in the original trilogy as far as making things look really interesting.
And after he completed the original trilogy, after Return of the Jedi, he was kind of burned out with the story. He didn't want to do a sequel series. He already decided he didn't want to do sequels, certainly yet, at least.
Hey, let Disney handle that later.
But he thought the idea of the story I've laid out, who's Darth Vader, that sort of thing, what were the Jedi like, that's what I want to work on. So he decided he wanted to do the prequel trilogy. And in 1993, I presume that he saw Jurassic Park because he says that he realized CGI or computer film had gone far enough that I can make the movie I want to make.
Now, while the CGI is much more advanced 6 years later, I kind of think Jurassic Park looks better.
Oh, it definitely looks better. But they also use a lot of really cool practical effects in the rain, and it was a tough shoot. But that's neither here nor there, and I'll get more into that as we go with Star Wars.
Well, and also once we get to our Jurassic Park cast.
Certainly. So 1993 happens. He realizes those graphics have come far enough along. He wants to make the prequel trilogy. He starts writing. Then production begins in 1994. Just a year later, he starts production. The show began filming in June of 97, wrapped up in September of that year. 2 years later, May 19th, 1999, and that's when the film is released to the public. It was a Wednesday, I believe, because Lucas was originally going to release it Friday, decided let's shift the premiere date to Wednesday so the hardcore fans can get out of the way, families can come watch on the weekend.
Were they early on that? Was Lucas early on the let's make the release day Friday, but then having like early release days and then kind of filter crowds in early like that?
I'm not sure, but that sounds about right because I think I remember doing that with Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi movie.
Certainly like everything after it, right? All the Marvel stuff,
so that
Harry
may
Potter
have been
stuff.
Pioneering. I'm not sure, but good point.
I remember a lot in terms of the marketing assault for episode 1 being all encompassing. Anywhere you were, you'd be seeing stuff about the Phantom Menace, which of course, me at 14, I was all for. Toy lines, posters, commercials, everywhere.
You would see that Darth Maul when the second Blade came out. I know young me was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
I was really pumped about Darth Maul in general. Still am. I mean, what more do you want?
Do you know what his species is?
Ray Park.
Yes. Zabrak is the Star Wars answer.
What?
And that's just one of the little factoids you're going to get on this show.
Yeah, I'm learning with you, audience, because Van is the expert here. I am something of an audience surrogate, if by audience surrogate you mean someone who knows a good bit about Star Wars, but not an obsessive, almost creepy amount like Van.
Okay, let's take it easy here. Well, for all the talk about how hated this movie is, it actually made an absolute assload of money against a $115 million budget, which to me seems low, but I think that was just inflation
of
era
the time,
times.
yeah.
It actually made a grand total at the box office of $1.27 billion. And that doesn't count toys and all kinds of other stuff. This thing made
money. Of which
money.
there were plenty.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's always been a Lucas thing.
Mm-hmm. He learned that was the best thing to do, is to make toys.
He's the guy who made toys of his own family.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, this is the thing I found out.
Did you know one of his kids is one of the little Jedi Padawans that gets murdered by the clones in episode 3?
I did know that, and I think all of this research that brought me to realizing that George Lucas's family had toys made of them at his request.
Can you imagine if your mom or your dad was just like, let's go make a toy of you and you can play with it with your friends? It's like, I've got Luke Skywalker. Well, I've got Brian.
I wonder who's going to win this fight. Who is the Force stronger with? Who is trained with Master Yoda?
So now let's get into the actual plot synopsis. We're going to cover this much like we cover shows on the Bootu Boys, our sister podcast. Go check that out wherever you get your podcasts from. It involves Brian Vaughn, myself, and our friend Spencer Hendricks.
Yeah.
So let's dive right into it. Our movie begins, as Star Wars movies always do, with the words, "A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." We get triumphant fanfare, and the thing that every single movie viewer loves, reading.
Oh, yeah, and not just reading like a movie today might have you read, which would be a 2-sentence paragraph that's a quote from a famous person preceding a movie. You have to read a short story.
Oh, yeah, and I will discuss this more when we get to the first filmed Star Wars movie, A New Hope, Episode 4. But essentially, George Lucas loved the crawl at the beginning of every Flash Gordon episode, and that's what he basically did. He watched that as a bearded child, because presumably always had that beard, decided to do it in this movie.
It was always gray, too, which is kind of odd.
Well, again, more to come in the New Hope episode, but essentially Lucas did envision Star Wars overall as something like the old serials, such as Flash Gordon, where he would pick up on an overall story at random times. So we would jump in with our characters, be told where they're at, and then watch it unfold. And that's exactly what we're doing here with the opening text. It points out that we're in the middle of a trade dispute where the taxation of outlying star system trade routes is coming under dispute. And we are given notice of both the heroic Galactic Republic and the dastardly Trade Federation, two important factions in the films to come. Brian, you know what I like in my action movies?
I don't know, like bureaucracy?
Lots of bureaucracy, some diplomacy, just lots of chatting in a giant room with a bunch of old people.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Perfect.
then let me recommend a series to you. It is the Star Wars prequels.
Well, it turns out the Trade Federation has set up a blockade on the small planet of Naboo, and we're told that the Galactic Congress is debating what to do about this. However, along the way, Chancellor Valorum has a trick up his sleeve.
Excuse me.
Oh, boy.
Webster's dictionary defines valor as great courage in the face of danger, especially in battle. Continue.
Valorum has a trick up his sleeve. He sent 2 Jedi Knights, guardians of the peace and justice in the galaxy, to settle this conflict. And this is where the story really picks up. Not picks up as in gets faster, picks up as in starts. That's what I'm going for here.
One thing about the opening crawl situation, I think that this works for Star Wars because of the aesthetic. The big font, the big bold font, the actual
Angle.
You're in space, the incline of the font coming in. I think it looks cool and became synonymous with Star Wars in a way that other film preceding font on the screen never has.
The problem is occasionally in the Star Wars universe, a starfighter or whatever crashes into a random comma.
Yeah, and then the sentence becomes confusing. And don't get me started on when it takes out a letter.
But occasionally it does take out an Oxford comma, and it's not too big of a deal.
It's not too big of a deal, but like pedants like us might be mad about it.
Well, a small starcraft slowly flies towards the ships blocking the planet below, and we see 2 cloaked figures on board the craft, and the voice of Schindler himself echoes from one of them, asking the pilot to tell the Trade Federation they wish to board at once. It's here that we're introduced to our first weird alien, Nute Gunray.
Mm-hmm.
He's the viceroy of the Trade Federation, basically the big guy, the one who controls it all. Well, I'll tell you a little bit here about Nute Gunray. He and his advisors are Nemoidian, who hail from the terrestrial planet Nemoidia and its system. The home planet had a foggy, humid atmosphere, so they're kind of frog-like, really,
that makes
essentially.
sense. Yeah.
And there is a lot of water, of course, but, again, just swampy is what I would think. And if you aren't aware, creatures here on Earth, that would be a frog.
Yeah, they love swamps.
Just for listeners from space who don't understand what's going on here. After boarding the ship, our 2 hooded Jedi figures are led to a conference room by a C-3PO droid, aka a protocol droid. And after telling the 2 Jedi Nute will be there in a minute, the Knights remove their hoods, revealing that our heroes are Renton from Trainspotting, and of course, Rob Roy himself, Liam Neeson.
Which is actually probably Liam Neeson's first stint at sword fighting, because he does a lot of it in that movie.
That's a good point, and that's one of his first career roles that he was garnered acclaim from.
Yeah, and this is actually just for both Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, this is a really interesting point in their career, because both are sort of reaching new levels of fame. Neeson had been in Schindler's List 5 years prior to this, and Rob Roy, I think, a year after that, so 4 years prior. He was a big name actor at this point.
Lots of dramatic roles, and he was good at it.
He was 47 at this time already.
Wow.
Looks great.
For 47, yeah. I would have guessed younger.
Liam Neeson, 38, looks great also. I'm not going to look that good at 38 this year later. I'll tell you that.
I've already surpassed him by about 20 years past Star Wars, and I'm 37.
Ewan McGregor had been in Trainspotting and was also just starting to pick up steam as a young acclaimed actor. So they both are at a good point to enter into a franchise where you're picking up that guaranteed paycheck.
So this might be the first time that movie studios started doing this. And by this, I mean George Lucas set out because he wanted to hire unknown actors.
Yeah.
A, they'd be cheaper. B, you could put them on contract for several years, that sort of thing. So that's why we see a lot of these young actors who've gone on to become big stars. Natalie Portman, Ewan McGregor, not so much Hayden Christensen, but some of those actors do become stars in their own right. And they started out here because of that. They had no other big roles. Or you've got Liam Neeson, who didn't even read the script and just said, okay, I'll be in the movie. He did. Because in his words, he said, it's Star Wars. It's got to be good, right?
And that's the funny thing about this trilogy, too, is it's the only one that I feel like has pretty massive star power.
Yeah.
At least in retrospect, out of the 3 Star Wars trilogies, because the original trilogy and the episode 7 through 9 trilogy, those really put an emphasis on fresh faces, which I think is super cool. And this one does too, as you mentioned, but you do have your Liam Neesons, your Samuel L. Jacksons et al.
Yeah, a couple of, maybe not the key component of the movie, but some side characters.
No, but there are
weight.
faces there that you're like, whoa, the gravity of this. Samuel L. Jackson is in this as a guy named Mace Windu. I bet he does a lot of cool stuff.
I'll bet there's snakes all over the Jedi Council that he gets rid of. Liam Neeson plays Maverick Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn, a wise and sage Jedi whose philosophy of following the living Force often put him at odds with the Jedi Council. Ewan McGregor plays a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the greatest members of the Jedi Order that we'll ever see on screen. Some interesting notes about these characters. When Obi-Wan was young and learning from others at the Jedi Temple, he was actually quite the rule breaker, which you wouldn't guess. He's more stoic and stone-faced. But no, in his youth, he was quite the scamp.
And I kind of do get that because in episode 1, Ewan McGregor plays him more wound up and anxious.
Yeah, that's true. And much, much less so in the second movie, for sure.
So unsure of himself. There's a lot of asking Qui-Gon. And until I had to take notes and analyze this, it didn't stick out to me as much. It's, I think, a good way to take the character.
Yoda mused back then that he wanted to find Kenobi a Jedi Master who was a little more unorthodox in their thinking, which would hopefully keep Kenobi invested and balance out his mischievous side. He found that in Master Qui-Gon, who would break not only with the Jedi Council's rules or decisions if he felt it was right, but also the Jedi Code. He was more of a go with what the Force is telling you right now, do it. He was
We see that here, too.
And he was not the stoic council guy, the Jedi Council guy. He was actually offered a spot on the Jedi Council, turned it down, because he said the Force didn't lead him there or tell him to take it or whatever. So he's at odds with the Jedi Council at times.
And I think that actually makes Qui-Gon one of the more interesting main Jedi characters in Star Wars.
Absolutely. And in fact, in the years since the movie came out, people have kind of come to the decision that Qui-Gon is really what a Jedi should be. Again, going with the Force. It's not just black or white. It's gray.
That's something in Star Wars that I think has gotten off the track a little bit, is that exact thing. And at least in the TV shows, too. Like you watch The Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett, there's a lot of code, and the idea of following these honor codes. And I really like the idea of pushing that into a grayer territory.
Yeah, definitely. That it's just Star Wars is very binary. And Lucas did that intentionally.
Yeah, I do think there's, and this is to the credit of what they could do going forward, but I think there's a lot of room to play with the negatives in that instead of presenting it as fact in the universe.
That's fair. And at this point in the galaxy, basically the point we're picking up here in the movie, the Sith have been gone for 1,000 years to the Jedi's knowledge. They've been in hiding. There have been Sith, of course, throughout the years.
They have a Sith safe house, kind of. It's in New Jersey.
You have to say the password.
You got to know the password, and they all sit around playing poker, just kind of waiting, biding their time.
With them being in secret, the Jedi have just been going on about their business, doing what they want to do. But the problem is suddenly the Jedi have a weakened connection to the Force. Something happened. If you go through the novel series, I believe it's the Darth Plagueis novel, which is apparently a great read. I've only skimmed bits of it. That's when we learn about some dark ritual that Plagueis and Palpatine did, which basically shifted the balance of the Force from light side to dark side. And that's the event that the Jedi in these movies describe when they say, something's wrong. We don't know what it is.
Yeah,
something's
and
wrong.
That ties into kind of what I was saying about Obi-Wan, is he is younger in his Jedihood here, and you get that sense of he knows something's off and doesn't know what. And that's kind of why he's so nervous.
And the Jedi, of course, over these 1,000 years have become even more rigid and idealistic. And they really kind of forget that their true path lies with doing what the Force says, not just being soldiers. And even Yoda says that, or Mace Windu says it actually. We are not soldiers. But they've become that, and they act as that.
Which is, I think, another nice little touch that even the Jedi are somewhat corruptible with unchecked power, in a sense of they're not necessarily that concerned of doing what's best anymore. It's just kind of lazy and rigid.
Yeah, exactly. And on the real life side of things, apparently Liam Neeson was hired into this role super late. He came on after they'd started some production.
That's the guy that played Taken.
That's him, Mr. Taken, and Taken 1, 2, and 3. Here's the thing, though. Liam Neeson is 6'4". The sets were too small. They had to spend like $200,000 to rebuild a lot of sets.
Wow.
Which in the $115 million, that's a drop in the bucket.
It's still kind of funny, though, just because they didn't plan. Good thing they didn't fucking hire James Cromwell to be Palpatine or something.
Well, as a fellow 6'4" person, I can tell you that I'm glad that they rebuilt the set to make it easier for Liam.
I bet they were accommodating all the 5'11" people, so I would have been just fine.
Yeah, you guys don't have to worry about that.
No, we are what the world is built for.
Well, we also get our standard, I have a bad feeling about this, which is present in every Star Wars movie. This is the first.
And most movies, probably. I'd say most genre movies of any kind, it's above 30%.
I think that's fair. That's crazy.
There's some line where a character essentially says that. And in Star Wars, I really like it.
Well, I like the one, I forget which sequel movie it is, but supposedly, I think it's R2 who says it, or BB-8. So you don't actually hear it in the movie.
Yeah.
But you just hear beep, 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 or whatever. That's kind of a neat little thing.
Yeah, it is. A neat way to turn it on its ear. Its robot ear.
Obi-Wan tells Qui-Gon something feels amiss somewhere. It's not this mission right now. It's just somewhere. Qui-Gon tells him, hey, don't get lost in your anxieties. Instead, focus on the here and now. Again, he says it here. The living force. That's what you follow. And that's central to his character, like I mentioned. Well, let me expound a bit here on the concept of the living force and just the force in general. It essentially has two components. There's the living force, which Qui-Gon mentioned. It's the energy of all life. You and I have the living force.
Debatable, but continue.
Well, then there's the cosmic force, which is more broad, and that's basically the power which binds the galaxy together.
Am I correct in this? That is essentially what Palpatine's always wanting to manipulate?
Yes.
Okay.
And that is what was manipulated in the story I was telling you earlier. When there's a big shift, they touched the cosmic force, Plagueis and Palpatine, which is not a thing that typically gets done, at least to the degree they did it. And that's what shifted everything around.
See, I like this. This makes me like Qui-Gon even more, because he is saying we need to be paying attention more to the smaller, down-to-earth, more human living force. We need to be essentially, heart over brain, because brain is more corruptible.
Yeah, I mean, that fits the narrative for sure. And by the way, it's actually through the cosmic force that Force ghosts, retaining your conscience, that's possible. So Qui-Gon, by the way, is the first Jedi to achieve that, certainly, and maybe not the first ever, but first in many,
so he's
years.
Definitely getting in the Hall of Fame.
He's definitely in the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
Jedi. Yeah. And how many do you think there is? 100?
Probably. I imagine they're pretty selective on this. The Veterans Committee's really annoying about it, though.
Well, you also get 15 years on the ballot, and if you're not voted for...
And they're basically only going to vote in Babe Ruth.
Qui-Gon discusses the mission here, and he says, these Federation types are cowards. The negotiations will be short. And that's basically a little bit, I don't know, racist, kind of? Speciesist?
Every one of them's a coward.
Yeah. A little bit much.
Yeah, you see a frogman walking around, you just assume he's a coward.
I'm just glad he stopped there. He wasn't just like, don't even get me started on the Trandoshans or the Geonosians. You know what? Anything with purple skin.
You know what? Anything in space.
We cut to the command deck of the ship where we're greeted with a hearty, what? What did you say? It's Nute Gunray, of course, and he learns from the protocol droid that the two ambassadors are Jedi Knights. Rune Hako, who is Nute's right-hand frog, he comes in with a, we are fucked, man. Nute devises a plan to contact this mysterious Lord Sidious, as he says. We haven't heard this before. And the two send that droid to distract the warriors.
You mean TC-14?
Is that the...
Yeah, well, let me tell you about this droid.
I'm kind of impressed.
I'm going to tell you I've seen cooler ones. This one seems like it's hiding something, like it's being too polite. Like it has too much human interaction. What I want out of any good droid is someone who won't stop talking and worries only for its own safety and is really annoying and gold.
Maybe a high-pitched voice.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Okay. I think we should get on this and figure one of these droids out.
Get one of those into the Star Wars universe.
A swarm of frog people stands on the deck of this ship as a hooded hologram poofs into view. It's Lord Sidious, we're told. Rune Hako decides to blurt out that your scheme is finished. We will dare not go against the Jedi. Sidious, of course, responds by telling Nute Gunray that he doesn't want to see Rune ever again, calling him stunted slime.
Oh, it's awesome. You know, off scene, this was actually recorded, but they deleted the scene later. It might be on the DVD. After uttering that line, Sidious actually says, do you need to call the fire department? Because you are ablaze. I have torched you so thoroughly right now.
And Nute has to kind of shimmy Rune off screen here.
It's one of my favorite parts of the early goings of this movie is Nute and what's his friend's name?
Rune
Rune essentially having to just put their tails between their legs and say like, oh yeah, we have to leave.
Just suffer for it. And they do it to their credit.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, I'm going to get this out there. Listeners of this podcast, if you haven't heard any of others, I like to bring up my girlfriend Katie on the show occasionally because she listens to the podcast. We watch these things together often. Her idea about Rune and Nute was that Rune isn't just a friend, Rune's his girlfriend.
Oh, you think so?
And no, not at all. I know so.
You know so? They haven't fucked?
But, okay, I don't know if that's
okay. Well, that is a
They're
different question.
They're not serious enough to label
committed.
themselves. Yeah.
They're not going to weddings together.
No, but she has stuck with this joke for years now, and occasionally she'll be like, oh, do you mean Nute Gunray's girlfriend? Or things like that.
What's his name again?
Rune.
Why can't I remember that? Well, to my point,
should I do a
Rune
picture?
Rune is the submissive one of the pair.
Okay, yeah,
I think it's pretty obvious because he always has to sort of take Sidious's shit, and then Nute does not speak up for Rune.
no, he just tucks his little frog lips into itself a little bit. I don't know. That's what they're doing.
And then goes back in and out of water because he can do both.
And he looks like a frog pope.
Yeah, his hat.
Lord Sidious laments that the act of the Jedi, being the ambassadors, has accelerated their plans. Now Gunray must deploy his troops to the planet immediately and kill those Jedi. When Nute questions if all of this is legal, Sidious' response is, I will make it legal.
So that's funny too, because Nute at first objects to something dicey, but the murdering hasn't been brought up yet. And Nute's like, well, again, is this against the rules? And then after Sidious torches him again, Nute's like, fine, I'll kill people.
Well, this Sidious is clearly insidious.
Huh? Wait.
We then see the starship which Kenobi and Qui-Gon arrived on is blasted by a cannon. Both pilots are aboard. The explosion causes our Jedi to jump to their feet and ignite their lightsabers. Just then, a poisonous gas begins to fill the conference room, and Qui-Gon shouts, Dioxys! As the two take a deep breath. So Dioxys is kind of interesting. In real life, it's a bee, species of bee, a black and white bee.
Oh, that's
kind of cool.
That's cool.
But in the Star Wars universe, it's a toxic gas, and you see it in video games all the time. Like you could throw a Dioxys grenade in Battlefront, which puts out this gas that if you stand in it, you lose health. So people will try and get off that objective. Kind of neat.
So there is some basis in why he named it that.
There usually is, although the 6 degrees of separation sometimes doesn't make a lot of sense.
There will be some names that we talk about in the future that you may think, how is there any basis in anything for this name?
A troop of B-1 battle droids are now waiting outside of the conference room when a Nute hologram informs them that the Jedi must be dead now. Go in and find those bodies. The door opens and that protocol droid steps out. What was his number?
It is TC-14.
That's the one. She comes wandering out, providing a jump scare, I guess, for the sassy battle droids.
I guess so, but she's so polite that it's not that scary.
And it's a little shuffle. She doesn't come out quickly.
Yeah.
We then see a green and blue lightsaber ignite. The Jedi rush out of the room and begin destroying the droids. They, of course, do this by using their space magic swords, but also at one point just kind of push them over a little with the Force. Just like, and then they're dead.
This part kind of reminds me of, you could say any Kung Fu movie, but also like any Steven Seagal style action movie where pushing over someone takes them out of the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that there were like battle droids that got knocked over and they were like, shit, I saw that laser sword. I'm just going to pretend to be done.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of lay down over here and hope people think that I'm dead.
Also, Roger. Meanwhile, Nute and Rune are freaking out, and Rune starts talking about how fucked they are. He asks Nute, have you ever seen what a Jedi can do, man? He starts being just a negative Nelly about everything. Close the blast doors. It's not going to work, man. Send out a squad of droidicas. We're not going to survive, man. This is it. You got to start saying your prayers, buddy.
Ooh, this is the end of the movie.
As Obi-Wan fights off the remaining droids, Qui-Gon decides he's just going to shove his lightsaber through the door to make it melt, and it works.
And it works. This is really funny in retrospect, too. A really inelegant solution to the problem.
Stab it. Rune points at the now red-hot door and says, see, man, I told you we were boned.
That guy can cut through doors. Imagine what he could do to a frogman.
But just as the door is nearly melted through, several rollerball robots show up, and those are droidicas. Droidicas have personal shields equipped and mounted heavy blasters, so the two Jedi would have a much harder time beating them. You can't just reflect their shots right back at them. So the two decide to run, and they just go right off the screen.
That's that.
This was called force speed, a force speed technique. Here's the thing. You never see it again.
Oh, man. It's almost like midichlorians in that way.
It's almost like they filmed it, realized it didn't make sense, and then went, well, let's just make him do magic.
Let's just not do it anymore, guys.
Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon escape into the main hangar via the ventilation system, and it's here that they realize the Federation ships are loaded with these battle droids. Obi-Wan says it's an invasion army, and the two decide their best course of action is to split up, stow aboard separate ships, and meet down on the planet Naboo. But not before Obi-Wan managed to get his little quip in here.
You were right about one thing, Master. The negotiations were short.
Listen here, you little shit.
Qui-Gon's probably like, what? Like, doesn't even remember making that little quip because they just fought a bunch of droids and he had to like saber through a door.
Back on the command deck, Nute and Rune receive a space Zoom call from a real peacock of a person.
Exactly what I called it.
It's Queen Amidala of Naboo. She's played by Natalie Portman, of course. Nute is glad that they're finally getting some results and says to her, "Again, you come before us, your highness."
And then Natalie Portman says...
Well, she tries to have her little gotcha moment here. She says, look, by now the Chancellor's Jedi Knight ambassadors have arrived to command you to remove your blockade from my planet. The whole boycott thing's done. But Nute, he says, I know nothing of any ambassadors, and that she must be mistaken. She furrows her brow as best she can with 20 pounds of makeup on her head, tells him you're playing with fire, to which Nute responds with, we would never do anything without the approval of the Senate.
Just laying it on thick. Nute knows how to mask sarcasm.
After Queen Amidala turns off her screen, Rune continues to nag at Nute, and Gunray gets frustrated and says we must quickly disrupt all communications down there.
Are you sure he doesn't mean communications to his fish penis?
It's a fish.
The
whole thing is just a fish.
He's a frog with a fish for a penis. It's really unfortunate.
You know what, though? If you look at the wiki, it might even say something like that.
It might. I guarantee that one character somewhere in Star Wars has gills on his penis.
I would not take the bet for the opposite. I'll tell you that much.
Call up George Lucas right now. He's at least got like a doodle and a notebook of a drawing like that.
He's not doing anything. What is he doing right now? Wandering around, stroking his beard?
Yeah, he's running around his ranch. Doesn't he have a ranch?
Full of Skywalkers, yeah. Skywalker
Oh, that's
Ranch.
its name. That's right.
It's where they grow them. That's why Rey turned out,
They don't put the like weird ones on screen.
No, those you have to sell to the farm up the street where they can be free all the time.
Yeah, some of them work there on Skywalker Ranch.
It's like in Wicker Man when you find out the men are all just labor and they're all real stupid. It's just Skywalkers.
Just everywhere, yeah. But again, the ones that are kind of wonky. So when you run up to like David Skywalker and he's running the gift shop, you'll think that guy kind of looks like Luke Skywalker. Maybe if he were attacked and mauled by an animal.
Like a wampa.
Yeah.
The wampa got a hold of him a little more. In the Queen's Palace on Naboo, a round table of colorful ladies and elderly men are hologramming in with their representatives to the Galactic Senate. Sheev Palpatine, who, hear me out, Brian, looks and sounds a little bit like that Lord Sidious from earlier.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm grasping at straws.
Okay, but innocent until proven guilty. I don't know. You are really jumping to conclusions here. I'm sure he's a really good guy.
Just a coincidence. Anyway, we get the space equivalent of Palpatine going, oh, I'm driving through a tunnel. Because the signal disappears. They can't see him anymore. His hollow call is shut off. Padme complains about losing the signal, and we get to hear from the captain of her personal guard, Mr. M. Bison from Street Fighter.
Yep.
Actually, it's Captain Panaka. Panaka is played by Ghanaian British actor Hugh Quarshie in the movie, and he was actually set to reprise his role in the sequel, but before filming, the crew told him he couldn't have the movie's full script. He was only allowed to see his own lines because they were preventing spoilers, and he said, I can't sign on. No thanks.
I'm not doing this. Panaka needs to know the context.
Half of me says, like, yes, you're an actor.
Yeah, me too.
But the other half is like, you're captain. Who gives a shit?
Me too, because it is a small role. But also, you got to draw the line somewhere with your craft, I guess. For instance, how we're not going to do any sort of tech podcasts or podcasts about
crypto.
Yeah, that's not happening. The line's got to be drawn somewhere. And that line is somewhere between Knight Rider and Star Wars.
So he declines, and this paves the way for a replacement character in the next movie, who we'll get to, of course, around episode 2. In universe, Panaka continued to serve the office of the Queen, and this is after this movie, of course, Eventually, he found his way into the Galactic Empire, and get this, Brian, you like this? He became a Moth.
Wow, you'd think I would have run into him at some point at the Moth stuff.
At one of the parties, like the Christmas
meetings,
party.
the conventions, yeah. The Christmas parties are fucking wild, too. We do a gift exchange.
What was the gift you got last time?
A lightsaber.
It's always a lightsaber.
Yeah.
On Bad Santa, it's just still a lightsaber, so no one really is too upset. But also no one's that excited.
We call it Bomb Bad Santa.
Panaka was eventually killed by a bomb right after he discovered that Leia Organa was Padme's daughter.
Huh.
He was going to tell the Emperor, but boom.
Wow.
You know who set that bomb?
Got taken out.
Forrest Whitaker, a.k.a. Saw Gerrera.
Yeah.
No, he was actually Forrest Whitaker. He's in Star Wars as himself.
So he plays two roles in the Star Wars universe as, what's his name?
Saw Gerrera.
Saw Gerrera, and he also plays Forrest Whitaker.
Yes.
So
better at Gerrera than Whitaker, which is weird.
Is he an award-winning actor as the Forrest Whitaker, or is this a different Forrest Whitaker played by Forrest Whitaker?
No, it's him as the award-winning actor.
Okay. So he probably commands a good deal of respect.
Sure. And that's how he blew up the Queen.
Guy's the last king of fucking Scotland.
As Panaka looks into the satellite trouble, Nebulian Governor C.O. Bibble, and by the way, it is Nebulian. That is the plural form. Or how would you say that?
I was way stuck on the second part of what you said, the name.
C.O. Bibble?
Yeah.
I understand. But to me, that's second nature.
No, I'm sure to you that C.O. Bibble rolls off the tongue like an this, and...
As many times as I gaff when hosting a podcast, I did not gaff when saying Nebulian Governor C.O. Bibble. Well, he comes in. He's got his Leonardo da Vinci face, and he says, a communications disruption can mean only one thing, an invasion.
We need to call Comcast.
The rest of the wise council does disagree with this ancient man. They say, no way would a calm, collected frogman like Nute Gunray invade. Come on.
I mean, the guy tells you at every turn he's not invading.
He would be denounced by the Senate if he did so.
Look, he said everything he's doing is legal and repeated it 4 times.
Panaka sees it overall, this is just a bad situation. He remarks that no way could our forces fight off an army successfully. But Amidala, she stands firm. She says, I will not condone a course of action that leads to war.
Oh, boy. You've alluded to it. Natalie Portman in this movie is 18 years old.
Okay.
She was already considered a very big rising star.
Yeah, she'd done some good movies.
She was in Leon the Professional. That was the big knockout
with that
role.
Weird French guy.
Gary Oldman. Jean
that's him. But
Reno.
Yes.
She also was in Mars Attacks.
What?
Yeah.
I don't remember this. I loved that movie when I was a kid.
Yeah, I did too. I can't stress enough. I think Natalie Portman's a really good actor.
Certainly.
And has been, she's been recognized as such. This is the worst she is in any role. And I don't know if it's the direction. I don't know if it's her interpretation of the character, the fact that she's young in her career at this point. She plays this wooden, not just when she's in her full makeup.
Even when she's, Padme the handmaiden,
Yeah.
it's still very much that way.
She's very, very awkward and out of place. And if this were a different actor, I might even say she's phoning it in, but this is her on the rise. And I don't take that she's that sort of performer anyway.
I think that it truly was direction. Because when we get to episode 2, we'll be introduced to Hayden Christensen as Anakin, and everyone hates on his performance, and his performance wasn't great. I think he gets unfairly lambasted with that. He's not a great actor.
Yeah.
Portman is. And this is to follow up your point about it possibly being direction. I think it's most likely because how can you even take away the charisma of Samuel L. Jackson? That's very true.
You know what? The prequels try. And I think that having really dynamic actors play characters bound by convention can work if you give the actor a little more room. But I don't feel like they have it here.
I don't think this was her problem, but what I will say is a lot of actors left this series after the first movie because they said they hated the way the filming was done with everything being CGI. Part of me
Your
is like,
physical acting has to be a lot tougher, right? Because
Yes,
spatially reacting to stuff would be really different. You can't see it.
Right, exactly. But when I hear that, I get both sides of the argument. Number one being like, yes, you want to be acting against other people.
Yeah.
But number two, also like this is a cool new thing. You should be stoked to do this.
The other thing about it to me is, and I'm certainly not an actor, but I would think stage actors would have to sort of pretend all the time when interacting with things.
And look, Ian McDiarmid, Emperor Palpatine, was a stage actor. he's genuinely good in these movies.
Yeah.
I mean, a little questionable in this one at times, but when he's Palpatine, when he's chewing up the scenery, you can see he's a theater actor, and
I
he's
think
good at it.
all of the British theater types that appear in all the Star Wars movies are much better at interpreting the material as space opera and then acting as such.
Well, Brian, it costs an awful lot of money to keep the Bootu Inc. studios up and running, so we need to go ahead and take a quick break here and hear from our sponsors.
If you are looking for a part for your J-Type 327 Nubian Royal Starship and don't want to deal with those disgusting Jawas, come on down to Watto's Junk Shop at the corner of the Sand Bog and Jabba's Fluid Trench.
I've got 30 years serving the Mosespa Republic, and our prices are out of this world. But not that crazy, though.
Hello, handsome shopkeep. I am but a simple Tusken Raider, come to take advantage of these low, low prices.
You're in luck, stranger. I've got just what you need.
I don't even mind paying the 10% surcharge for Tusken Raiders. What fine products do you have in stock?
We've got the gunk droids.
$349.99.
We've got the rods of indeterminate link.
$39.99.
We've got the 2009 Dodge Intrepid headlight assembly.
$99.99.
Wait, not that low. Hold on.
$79.99.
That's right, the simple-stand person friend. And don't forget to bring your unused trash and broken appliances. We've got slaves to fix them. Please bring me your money.
All sales final, returns not accepted even with receipt. All prices in Whoopie Whoopie. No Jedi mind tricks will be tolerated. Open 9 days per week. Closed for the Sabbath.
Well, Amidala, like I said, stood firm. She says, I will not condone an action that leads to war.
Now, you had a little too much inflection there, but I take your point.
You get it. Well, next up, war. We're treated to the sight of various ships and tanks as the Trade Federation army begins to descend onto the planet. Then we encounter powerful warrior Qui-Gon Jinn fleeing from a droid transport tank along a bunch of cows, like Naboo cows and weird critters, and possibly the weirdest critter of them all. As he runs from the transport, we bear witness to a stalk-eyed, smooth-skinned aquatic bat. He's a creature who seems frightened, confused at the coming danger. Seeing no other choice, Qui-Gon launches on top of the weird creature, allowing both of them to slip below the vehicle unscathed.
Or what you might have seen, Qui-Gon is running with the Gungans and leaps and hugs the air, which is just what it looks like.
Jar Jar in the movie was played by Ahmed Best on set.
Yeah.
He spoke, he had this stupid Jar Jar hat on that the actors had to look at. So there was a physical presence there, but certainly grabbing and having to green screen certain things out doesn't work too well. So a scene like this where Qui-Gon's holding him looks so weird.
It's so off.
You can get the ones where he's standing next to him, fine.
Yeah.
But this...
And I feel like this may have even been a case of what's Liam Neeson supposed to do? He's acting naturalistic enough in terms of how he's holding this fake being, this non-existent being who I think a lot of Star Wars fans wish really was non-existent. But then when you play it back, when it's down to the creative team, like the tech people to make it look good, they probably didn't have a way to.
No way. 1998 or whatever when they're working on this at first. As the danger passes, our Jedi hero begins to continue on his trek to search for his Padawan. But much to his and Star Wars fans' dismay, the creature he saved decides to tag along, pestering him all along the way.
All along the series.
It does thank Qui-Gon for saving him, and the Jedi asks him, "You almost got us killed. Are you brainless?" To which the monster said, "Well, I speak, don't I?" Or, I'm sorry, excuse me. I speak! This causes Qui-Gon to say possibly the most prescient line in all of Star Wars history. The ability to speak does not make you intelligent. Now scram!
A fact many people would be wise to heed.
This horrible creature reveals his name is Jar Jar Binks. He now owes Qui-Gon what's called a life debt as dictated by the gods.
I have to think that the Gungan god is the Noid, maybe. Something like that.
They look the same, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why they all have Avoid the Noid Fridays.
Perhaps that rabbit you need to leap at in Mario 64 and catch in the castle, they might think that's God.
Well, despite Qui-Gon's protesting, Jar Jar continues to follow along at his heel. They meet up with Obi-Wan, who is being chased by a droid on a speeder bike, and after dispatching the droid, Obi-Wan takes one look at Jar Jar, channels his best impersonation of a Star Wars fan in the theater in 1999, seeing this character for the first time, and blurts out, "What's this?" Through conversing, the Jedis learn Jar Jar comes from a hidden city, which would be a very safe place to hide, but Seconds later, Jar Jar realizes, oh shit, I've been kicked out of the Hidden City for being a dipshit.
I can't imagine why. And I'm just blown away right away upon re-encountering Jar Jar, how they were able to double down on this sort of speech pattern. Jar Jar talks a lot, and he's the comedic relief, and he says no sentences like sentences.
He talks like the baby in Dinosaurs from the 90s.
Like, an example is in this scene, he says to Qui-Gon Jinn, he says, "You saved my again." And listening to that, I know what he means is my just means me, or some slang like my ass, like in general.
You just saved my ass again, Qui-Gon.
But you're listening to it and you're like, my what? That's what I was thinking when I heard it, because it's just weird. That one's not annoying so much as just off and kind of disorienting.
Distracting, yeah.
Now, the Misa stuff is annoying.
Oh, absolutely. That's the catchphrasey stuff that no one likes.
Every time he says anything possessive, any I or me, it's Misa.
After a bit of convincing, Jar Jar finally agrees to take the two to the hidden underwater city of Otagunga, which they reach by swimming under the nearest body of water. Conveniently, they were right next to it.
Mm-hmm.
We gaze in wonder at the massive city sprawling beneath the water surface, and our trio arrive through a special dry bubble, which also dries their heavy robes immediately with underwater space magic. And I can't help but realize that despite the magnificence of this grand locale, it actually houses, I would say, 1 million Jar Jars?
Yeah.
So it has to be
that.
A nightmarish hellscape.
Someone there's a really impressive city planner and architect. I don't know who, because if they're all total Jar Jars, I don't know how they're even alive.
Might be Roose Tarples, who we meet here as he comes up to Jar Jar on his horse.
He's a captain, by the way.
He's a horse cop.
Captain Tarples.
Captain Tarples. What a name. That's definitely one of those Star Wars names.
It's one I had to make note of, I'll tell you that.
He's obviously a gravelly voiced Gungan. He will actually ascend to the rank of general here shortly. We'll see him.
Is it because his face tendrils have gotten so long?
Mm-hmm. That makes you dignified. Now, Tarples makes his only movie appearance here, but he did show up in some episodes of the Clone Wars show, where he met his end at the robot hands of General Grievous.
Oh, man. Poor Tarps.
Yeah, Tarples died a hero, though. He was giving the good guys in that episode just enough time to escape while Grievous stabbed him through the back.
Which is a total Grievous move.
That's how you do it, man. Or you skitter. Like a weird
Have you ever
bug.
tried this one when you're in like a mortal fight to the death? Say, hey, look over there.
Tarples tells Jar Jar he's in big doo-doo this time.
I think this might be the nadir of the movie right here.
Pretty much, yeah, I would agree with that. This is when all the critics go, mwah.
In big doo-doo.
Well, he tells them that you guys are all going to go see the boss.
Mm-hmm. And then Jar Jar actually leaves the movie at this point and is replaced by Full House actress Jodie Sweetin, who responds with, "How rude!" The first of 4 times.
Which is fascinating to me because that was already a catchphrase that was well known. Why did they just
take it? Like a decade
take it?
prior. Like Jar Jar was knocking stuff over and was like, "Did I do that?
Where's the beef?"
Oh, man. Really, any catchphrases Jar Jar is really, really funny.
Misa have it my way at Burger King.
Samokin!
Well, who is this boss, you may ask? Why, it's Boss Nass.
Hell yeah, it is.
He's an enormous Gungan with a cool snail-shaped helmet, and he's obviously got a weird speaking pattern, because they all do.
Boss Nass is one of the few characters who the actor playing him looks like Boss Nass.
Yes.
And this is English actor Brian Blessed, who I think probably George Lucas wanted in part because he was in Flash Gordon.
Oh, sure.
I mean, he was in just a ton of stuff. He was in I, Claudius, that British miniseries. He's like a pretty well-regarded actor, but he is the actor you want to play a big Robert Baratheon-type leader. Whether you want to edge it in terms of being jovial or edge it in terms of him being kind of curmudgeonly like a Boss Nass type.
He can do it.
He's got a lot of panache.
I don't remember what character it was for, but actually this actor auditioned for a different role, and Lucas found him
Anakin.
Lucas found him a little too commanding of a presence.
Yeah.
He was too much there. So
he's got a big booming voice.
Changed him to Boss Nass, and it worked out. Qui-Gon has explained to Boss Nass that there is trouble brewing above the water, and there are tens of thousands of battle droids marching towards the Nebulian capital. Nass not only doesn't believe Qui-Gon, but he has a little bit of a problem with the people above the water themselves.
We are no like the Naboo. Naboo think they so smarty. They think their brain so big.
Naboo tiny brain don't compare to size of massive Boss Nass brain.
I wish we would have gotten a little thought bubble for Qui-Gon during this scene of like, what am I supposed to do with this? This is the guy in charge.
No wonder he resorts to space manipulation here in a minute. Having failed to convince the loud, obnoxious swamp monsters of the danger facing their society, Qui-Gon decides now is the time to use his magic powers to get them out of a jam. He does the Jedi mind trick, waving his hand and convincing Boss Nass to help. And he sends the Jedi along their way, but it slightly backfires. Nass tells them they'll receive a bongo, which is their like submarine thing that they're going to scoot along from, but they're going to use it to travel through the planet core.
Okay. Did they have to do it this way?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's no other way to get to Naboo.
Well, I mean, you can take the scenic route, but it takes a little longer.
Okay, I guess they are actually crunched for time.
And they will take that, of course, to get to the capital city of Theed. Jar Jar's a bit taken aback by this,
Me
by the
too,
way.
and I'm glad at least now we don't have to deal with him anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Because
this
he'll
is
stay
it.
with his people.
Yeah, problem over. Except Qui-Gon. You know how I mentioned he would occasionally go against the Jedi Code and go with the Force?
Mm-hmm.
This time, he decides to completely ignore the Force, which is there waving its arm saying, go, go,
Get
go.
out. Save the world.
Nope, he turns around and he asks Boss Nass about the fate of Jar Jar. He tells him that Binks owes him a life debt. The gods demand that his life belongs to me now. Boss Nass confirms this with Jar Jar and then lets out a hearty...
That is absolutely correct. Remember what I said earlier about me liking Qui-Gon's take on the Force and how to interpret it?
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't like what results.
The group heads on their way with Jar Jar in tow. The next bit of movie is just dumb CGI stuff. We're going to skip a lot of this. It has no great relevance to the
There's
plot.
a lot of people putting in voiceover work on the side of being like, a
fish.
Or Misa.
Yeah, it's just a fish getting eaten by a bigger fish, which is chasing them, and then there's a fish. And this led to, of course, the Star Wars meme, there's always a bigger fish.
These are goober fish,
It's
right?
a goober fish.
That's what these fish are called.
Are they?
That's what Jar Jar Binks calls these fish.
Oh.
I'm assuming that's legit.
I got to tell you, even though I'm the one who's supposed to know more, I completely ignore everything Jar Jar says. Two things I do want to point out from this little bit where they travel through the planet core. The first is that at one point, Jar Jar starts freaking out, and Qui-Gon decides to use the Jedi equivalent of a roofie on him and just makes him pass out.
Is that ethical? I mean,
It is in this scenario.
in this scenario, it's life or death, and he's a problem.
Normal scenarios, I don't think so.
No, it made me really fearful of what Qui-Gon's done in his past.
I would say, though, that the whole of the audience approves of him doing it here.
Yes. If they had gotten past all the goober fish and then realized on his way down to passing out, Jar Jar hit his head and died, what percentage of the audience is sad over the age of 16?
Well, with that stipulation, it's got to be. You know what? I'm not a 100% guy, so I'll say 0.001.
Because Ahmed Best is probably bummed he doesn't get to reprise the role if that happens.
And it's too bad. I want that guy to have a lot of money
me too.
for what he
and
went
the
through.
best family.
He's a
It's
cool
in
dude.
their name. They're the best.
The second thing I'd like to mention from this is the Jedi asked Jar Jar why he was kicked out of the Gungan city. He reveals it's because he's clumsy, and I personally would like to take this moment to say that that's bullshit, and you should not kick people out for being clumsy.
I've got some bad news about the podcast.
Shit.
It's just going to be me from now on.
You're too clumsy
You're
for the
too
podcast.
clumsy.
Meanwhile, in all of this, Lord Sidious has hollow contacted Nute Gunray and Rune Hako. He's checking in on the two and apprising everyone of the plan. He claims Queen Amidala is young and naive, so their fears of her resistance are unfounded. After Sidious zaps away, Rune asks Nute, "Why didn't you tell him about the missing Jedi?" And Nute says, "Oh, no reason to talk about that. There's nothing to say. No news is good news."
Quit bothering me about my business, Ruin. A man has his own secrets. Especially a frog man.
Eventually, we witness the Trade Federation army occupying the city of Theed, the beautiful city of Theed. They march directly up to the capital with their overwhelming numbers. We then see Queen Amidala peering out of her enormous window. She's wearing her best Chinese New Year outfit, complete with lanterns all along the side, that you can tell that she's dismayed and forlorn over seeing her city taken over by the enemy.
Her plan for peace is not reaching fruition.
Next, in a scene reminiscent of George Bush on that aircraft carrier with a mission accomplished banner behind him, Nute Gunray, who when told that they have the queen, says, "Ah, victory.
Time to go on vacation. Sandals, Jamaica.
I've been working hard.
Ruin, I'm sorry about the mean things I've said.
Kiss me deeply. I've always loved you, even as a tadpole."
Do you want to do this underwater or overwater? We have option of both.
"No, Newt, keep the hat on."
We make a few tadpoles of our own. Continue, Federation.
But unfortunately for Gunray, it's here that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan arrive in the city alongside their new monster and realize that the city seems desolate. Cut to Nute, Amidala, C.O. Bibble, Captain Panaka, and a whole host of other people with stupid names. They're all being led down a flight of stairs while Nute explains his grand plan.
Which is all legal.
Yes, certainly. Oh, did I mention that this is legal? The way he's going to get around the Senate is he's going to force the Queen to sign a treaty alongside him, which will then legitimize his occupation. I don't know if that's how that works, but...
I don't think so. I mean, it's a plan. It's a strategy.
And it's at this point that the Queen has actually switched from the Chinese New Year theme for her outfit and has instead chosen Goth Rooster as the replacement.
Mm-hmm.
The Queen says she will not sign the treaty and will not cooperate. Brian, does she seem a little different?
She seems so not different in her delivery that perhaps it could even be a different person because they're so interchangeable. People talk like cardboard cutouts.
Nah, must be nothing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, we find out much later in the movie that, of course, Amidala has switched places with one of her handmaidens. Spoiler alert. Sabe is the name of that handmaiden, and she's played by Keira Knightley. Which
Another very acclaimed, famous actor who shows up here way before, I think, any sort of that acclaim rolled in.
I think so. A little bit of trivia from this scenario is that Keira Knightley and Natalie Portman's moms couldn't tell the difference between two of them when they were in like makeup and everything, so they would approach the wrong child.
I wonder how they handled that when they were watching Atonement. If they were like, is that... No, that's Keira Knightley, I think. I think that's my daughter. Who's this in the black swan there dancing about? Is that Natalie Portman? Is that Keira Knightley?
At the end of their conversation, Nute tells a commanding battle droid to process them. Of course, then this battle droid tells a different battle droid to take them to Camp 4. George Lucas just...
Yeah.
I needed to know the chain of command from battle droids, and he slips it in.
I think this is the kind of stuff that still wets his whistle, if you know what I mean. I don't think George Lucas can get off on simply having like a hero's journey space quest anymore. It's more about the bureaucracy, the chain of command, kind of what characters like to have for lunch, that sort of stuff.
When I sat down to watch this movie, the first thing I saw when it said Trade Federation was, how good are they at delegation? Now I know. I am
and
fulfilled.
This fills in that gap. You know that they're organized, even if at times it doesn't seem like it.
See fans out there who are like, this movie sucks. Deep, man. Deep. We know that Battle Droid with a circle is ahead of Battle Droid without a circle.
If you just imagine a C-SPAN logo in the corner, this becomes way more interesting.
You know what, though? If C-SPAN had this stuff, I'd watch the shit out of that.
The C stands for Coruscant.
Sneaking around the town, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Jar Jar come across the group escorting the Queen and her advisors and handmaidens. And I do have to say, again, as a fellow 6'4" person, seeing Liam Neeson try to sneak around is both cringy and accurate. This is what it looks like. The two knights see their moment. They leap down from the balcony, and Jar Jar falls off of it, of course. They attack the battle droid escort, freeing the group. Once the group gets into a safe spot, Qui-Gon introduces himself as one of the negotiators sent by the Chancellor, and C.O. Bibble decides that, you know what, this guy just saved me from presumably a horrible experience. I'm going to just question him a lot. It seems like your negotiations didn't go well.
It's like, I could have let you die, Bibble. Did you skip over the part where after this fight, Jar Jar says...
Probably.
Use a guy's bomb bad.
Sure did.
Okay, well, listeners, note that.
This is where it happened. Put it in your scoreboard while you're keeping score with your podcast, A Star Wars Story scoreboard. Your bingo card.
On sale now for the low price of $499.99.
Teespring.com. The group goes over what's happened at this point, and they determine that the best course of action is to head to the hangar and find a ship to escape with. See, their only hope is to get the Galactic Senate to side with them, and the best way to do that is to plead with him in person. Now, Amidala, air quotes here, she's torn on what to do.
Regular Natalie Imbruglia. Can't say the word torn around me, really.
So what should she do? Abandon her people and speak to the Senate in person, or remain on the planet and fight with the Nabulians, the proud Nabulians, called Nabulians?
And this is, honestly, the quandary any good leader is forced to ask themselves in a time of war, right?
That's right.
Do I need to stay with my people, or are my services best needed elsewhere?
Well, she turns and locks eyes with a very particular handmaiden who looks an awful lot like the girl from Garden State. I don't know if you caught that.
I thought it was the girl from Domino.
Oh, maybe it was. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. And she speaks with that inspiring tone.
Either choice presents great danger to us all.
Isn't this a scenario where you need to show emotion? This is a deep moment.
I think so.
And
I think you could argue, this isn't an argument I agree with, that Natalie Portman's choice or the directorial choice here is so that you can't tell the difference between
the two. Yeah.
Yeah, between the two, have that flat affect. I'm sorry, but like you could just talk like a normal person and achieve pretty much the same thing.
I think the other thing that they were going for was being stoic.
Yes.
Stoic nature, the unflinching stone, which can handle whatever's thrown at her.
Is this just a case of simply, okay, all of that makes sense for the character, like being stoic and resilient, but there's a better way to do it than to go all the way to talks like a droid?
You would think.
I mean, the droids speak much more expressively, and they are literally robots.
She eventually agrees to go to the Senate, so the group heads to the hangar. Conveniently, a group of pilots, all in their M. Bison outfits, sit captured and surrounded by multiple battle droids, and Panaka tells the Jedi that they will need to free them to aid in the escape. Panaka starts to pull out his blaster and head that way, but Obi-Wan says, nah, I got this. Go back.
Don't worry, you won't be in the next movie anyway.
He heads that direction, and Qui-Gon and the rest go towards a transport ship. A Commander B-1 unit intercepts the main group and asks who they are and where they're going. Qui-Gon replies, I'm an ambassador to the Supreme Chancellor. I'm escorting the Queen and the rest of these people to the Coruscant. The B-1 says, where is it you're going? To Coruscant. Coruscant. Shit, that rings a bell. Have I heard of that before? I'm a fucking robot who's been programmed with this preordained set of knowledge. Attack! And look, I know the robot attitude, the sass.
I know what robots are up to, this fucking attitude they're putting on.
That sass is universally despised by the fandom, but I love it. I think it's great.
Robot sass is one of my favorite things about Star Wars. It's one of the things that separates it from dry sci-fi. It's a space fantasy, half sci-fi thing where you get to have a good time. And that's why the bureaucratic stuff doesn't work that well.
Exactly. I do love the idea that some Geonosian bug programmer, and that's the bug species that we see in episode 2, they're called Geonosians.
I did not know that.
I just picture a scientist bug sitting down being like, you know what? I'm going to make the murder robots sassy as fuck.
Well, think about it. You're a robot maker guy.
Bug.
Probably a lot of people have given you shit over the years. And like George Costanza and his Jerk Store line, you've thought of all the things you could say but never said. Well, he can program the robots to do that.
Brilliant. We got to find Craig T. Geonosian, who is making these robots, and commend him. They're all dead.
I'd love
Empire wiped him out.
I'd love to have a Brian robot that actually said anything cool, that I could program ahead of time.
Well, we have the Brian toy that George Lucas made.
We have Brian Blessed, the actor.
We know you're a Moff. Grand Moff.
Grand Moff.
Yeah,
don't
pretty
fucking
impressive.
shortchange me. I'm like at the same level as Gus Fring, right?
He's a regular Moff.
So I'm above him.
You're Tarkin.
Holy shit.
You are Peter Cushing. That's who you are.
Okay, I am moving up in the world.
A couple more movies. We'll get there. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon make quick work of these robots, and we even... Oh, by the way, Star Wars fans hate it when you call them robots, so I love to call them robots.
I do too.
Droids.
In my opinion, you shouldn't take entertainments so seriously.
Well, with the hangar clear, the teams board their ships and begin to leave the planet. Aboard their transport ship, Obi-Wan realizes the danger that Jar Jar represents just being around physically.
I agree.
He drags him to the basement and is just like, stay here, don't touch anything,
Obi-Wan's
please.
open contempt for Jar Jar is pretty funny.
What does he say later in the movie? I have the feeling we picked up another pathetic life form talking about Anakin.
Obi-Wan's mind isn't changed from the first time he laid eyes on Jar Jar and said, what is this?
Good judge of character. Jar Jar turns around in this room and introduces himself to the robots that are there. And what do we see but a familiar face, wiggling camera orb? R2-D2, he's here.
Yay!
Hopefully he'll make it better that we have to deal with Jar Jar.
He will. He makes everything better.
On the bridge of the ship, we get to meet our captain, who points out the fleet blockading the planet and says to Qui-Gon, Studio.
Okay. He really does look like Phil Collins.
An awful lot. Yeah, no, he may look like Phil Collins. It's not Phil Collins. This actor presumably didn't divorce his wife via fax.
I don't think he did. Hey, where are they flying that ship?
Where?
In the air tonight.
Oh, well, this is actually Rick Ollie is the name of this.
This is
pilot.
episode 1, which is sort of the genesis of the Star Wars stories. Things in the sky are like angels.
Rick Ollie is the commander of the Naboo Royal Space Fighter Corps, which is pretty cool sounding.
Uh-huh.
He was played by English actor Ralph Brown, who appeared in movies like Alien 3, Wayne's World 2, and currently is a part of the Brighton, England-based Beach Boys tribute band called the Brighton Beach Boys.
You could have made that up.
But I didn't.
But I think it's real.
Trade Federation ships begin firing at the escaping ship, and despite Ollie's piloting, they are hit by a blast, and the shield generator is damaged. In the basement, the swarm of droids in the room with Jar Jar activate and go into repair mode. As the droids ascend into the hull of the ship, they begin to work on repairing the generator, but droid after droid is wiped out by errant laser blasts. In fact, we do get this horrifying sound after a droid is evaporated into nothingness. Did you catch that?
That is a scream in the chasm of the end of life.
But it's a robot, too. I love that robot
But it's also a
scream.
robot. Yeah, again, that is fun. The anthropomorphization of the droids in the Star Wars universe.
But suddenly, one plucky little fart noise-making droid uses his little poker claw to plug something in, and Ollie says, "That little droid did it! The shields are back!"
Just effortlessly. Again, R2-D2 is the
He's
secret
good.
MVP.
The robot unfurls its third tripod leg and heads back into the ship. Our heroes rocket past the seemingly bad trade blockade. Seems like it shouldn't be this easy. It's like, oh, do they have a robot?
Yeah.
They might make it. They aren't completely out of danger yet, though. Ollie says that they don't have enough power to make it to Coruscant because the hyperdrive is leaking. So I guess this would make it not another day in paradise, right?
Oh, you came up with another one. That was good.
They survived against all odds to live one more night. Okay, I think I'm good.
Wait, I think they live longer than that, though.
Tarzan
Some of
soundtrack.
them. Yeah, Lion King
Is that what it was?
also.
Oh, yeah.
I
You like
think.
won a bunch of awards for that?
Or maybe that's just Elton John. No, I think Phil Collins was involved in that, too.
Because he did that for a while.
Yeah.
Qui-Gon points out that they need to land somewhere to repair the ship, hopefully somewhere with a flying snout monster with a couple of slaves. And Obi-Wan points at his computer saying, hey, let's go here. It's Tatooine. Small, out of the way. Most of the movies take place there anyway, so we've got to get there sooner or later.
And it's like pretty off in the weeds.
Yeah. It's controlled
Nobody
by the
really
Hutts.
pays attention to what goes on in Tatooine.
Panaka gets pissed that he hears Tatooine. If you took the Queen to a planet controlled by the Hutts, they're going to do terrible things to her. Qui-Gon says, look, it's going to be no different if we went to a planet that was controlled by the Federation. The only difference here is the Hutts aren't looking for the Queen. We're going to Tatooine.
And the Hutts don't really care about doing anything the Federation says either, right?
No, the Hutts basically take pride in their independence. We beat the Empire to the point that they leave us alone.
The Hutt situation is like that Money Plane movie that we watched with Kelsey Grammer
And
and
Edge.
Edge, where it's like a lawless haven of sorts. You can do anything there.
As long as you're on a plane.
You can get messed up, you can sell stuff and bet and gamble and kill.
An establishment shot of the Trade Federation's Lucrehulk-class battle station greets our awestruck eyes as, you guessed it, more Nute Gunray. It'd been too long already.
Star of the show.
This time, Nute and Rune are in their big conference room with a hologram Lord Sidious sitting at the table. I don't mean he's on a device on the table.
Nope.
I don't mean he's back a ways from the table. They have set a place for Palpatine's hologram.
For the hologram to sit down, which when it initially happens, I was laughing at it. And then I realized, at least from like a visual perspective, why shortly into this. Which is they have to have Darth Maul get involved. And the way to do that is to have him appear domineering over everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They have to have Sidious sit down. Yeah, so he appeared so that Ray Park seems even more intimidating.
Yeah, but at this point, it just looks like they're having a family
At
dinner
this
together.
point, it's like, I feel like they're showing off what hologram technology can do. Look, they can even sit down like they're really here.
Unfortunately, though, this is not a happy occasion for Nute Gunray. Sidious asks the frog people about the treaty and whether or not they've gotten the Queen to sign it yet. And Nute has to reveal that he managed to lose the most important prisoner they had. In fact, the only prisoner they needed. He says it's going to be impossible to locate them because the ship is out of our range. But Sidious responds with, not for a Sith. And as the words escape his elderly lips, a shadowy cloaked figure that presumably was just right outside of transmission range, just standing back a bit.
Waiting for his cue, waiting for that text.
He just pops right through. Sidious introduces the scary-eyed creature as his apprentice, Darth Maul. So he says apprentice. We know Sidious is a Darth now. So I'm going to refer to him as Darth Sidious from here on out.
I'd like to point out how good of a job Darth Maul does at hitting his cues here. Right as he's introduced, he crosses his arms like Mr. Clean and kind of looks pouty. Like, don't you mess with me. I am a force to be reckoned with.
Also, I got cool horns. Lots of them.
I'm pretty red.
Darth Maul was played by Ray Park, who is a Scottish actor, stuntman, and martial artist. Park was actually picked to play the role for his athleticism after actor Benicio del Toro dropped out of the project. He was originally signed to be Darth Maul.
Pretty amazing.
But eventually Lucas came to del Toro and said, look, I've cut the character down. He's only got like 6 minutes of time. He only has a couple of lines.
You have to have lines for Benicio del Toro.
And he was a growing actor at this point, coming into his own. So he just didn't want to take that role to take his time up. I get it.
You're exactly right. This is like when he's first kind of ascending to fame, I think.
And I'll have more Maul trivia as we go along, too. Not M-A-L-L, M-A-U-L.
Did you know
Mall of America
that they sell Dippin' Dots in malls?
Ice cream of the future. After introducing Darth Maul, Sidious opacities out of the conversation, which leads Nute Gunray to remark the meme-worthy line, "This is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them."
At this point, Nute and his friend, they don't really know
Rune Hako.
And Rune, who for some reason just keeps slipping off my brain like shoes off a foot.
He's so memorable. I don't get it.
They don't know really that the Siths are this back.
Well, they don't know what a Sith is. I mean, Sith have been gone for 1,000 years.
Okay.
Very few people understand or know what that word means. And certainly not Nute Gunray.
Because they do seem to almost like how I would react if a Bigfoot walked in.
But they're also not as terrified.
No,
they just know this is a powerful guy.
They're not, because they don't believe it, really.
Yeah.
It almost seems like they're not 100% of the way there.
They're just, because this is presumably the most evil being in the universe.
Yeah.
Most powerful
too
and evil.
fantastical. Like, they're saying the words, but they're not separating themselves.
And they're rolling their eyes a little. If
they can
weird
do
eyes
that,
can do that.
I don't know. All I know is they can jump.
Eat some mosquitoes, probably.
Eat mosquitoes. Cross the street. They're really good at that.
Oh, yeah. Occasionally across Jeeps and trucks and alligators, whatever's in the way. Space alligators.
Oh, man, that's the coolest kind.
Meanwhile, on the Nebulian transport, they have set up a roosting room for Queen Amidala. She's going to lay her black emo eggs here, complete with throne and handmaidens. Captain Panaka, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon are here. They're showing the Queen a really cool robot friend that they found, and Panaka calls it an extremely well-put-together little droid, which sounds a little creepy.
Well, Panaka has a taste.
Your Highness, this droid has got it going on.
Would you look at the caboose on this droid?
36, 24, 36. What a winning hand. The Queen, who isn't the Queen, says the robot's to be commended. What is its number? Panaka paws at the little robot and says, R2-D2, Your Highness. I'm surprised you didn't recognize him. He's the star of Star Wars.
And then he winks at the camera.
Not the Queen says, this brave droid is to be rewarded. Padme, clean him up and bestow upon him a $100 Space Chili's gift card. With the 2 for $20 deal, you can even bring a friend and get multiple trips out of one card.
And then R2's like,
he beeps and whistles like crazy. Okay, I do want to clear one thing up here, and it's the names. So we know Padme obviously is the Queen. This is Sabe, but they're calling her Queen Amidala.
Yes.
So it gets a little confusing that you would actually call her Padme, because wouldn't everybody know Padme Amidala is the Queen?
That's the full name. Yeah,
no.
This is funny because I didn't think anything of it as a kid, but it is a little much to have 3 names they call her individually.
Okay, her full name, if you look on the internet, what is Padme's full name?
Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman. It's Padme Nabari Amidala. Amidala is a royal name that she chose when running for queen or whatever. So basically to the public, she's known as Amidala. That's it. They don't know. They don't know what would be her maiden name, and they don't know her first name. Only the people she loves and knows and has in close proximity know Padme is the Queen's real name. So that's why they still just utter it out.
Okay, that makes sense.
It was just a political
At least
thing.
there is a reason.
Oh boy. Next up, we get a good old-fashioned whimsical bullshit scene. It's got Jar Jar in it. We encounter Padme. She's scraping some gunk off of R2-D2 when the leathery snout of Jar Jar peeks his head around the corner and just Gungan vomits a bunch of stuff at him. It's just his story, his background story. And she starts to realize she's listening to this idiot and having to clean a dirty robot and wondering if switching places with a smart decision.
There might be something at least more interesting to do.
Arriving on the desert planet of Tatooine, Qui-Gon heads out to the city to look for parts. He's joined by R2-D2 and Jar Jar for some reason.
He tells Jar Jar at some point during this to stay out of it, like keep out of trouble.
But then come with me.
That didn't make any sense to me. But I would like to note, when he initially tells Jar Jar, don't come along, just stay here out of trouble. That elicits Jar Jar's second how rude already in this movie.
Too many.
Yeah.
I'm going to go on a
Too
limb.
many, and we're not near done. We're halfway done with the how rudes.
Before the trio can get into town, Captain Panaka yells for them to wait. Turns out the Queen wants to send her handmaiden with them to learn things about the planet and the people. Also, it's not because this is the actual Queen. It's seriously because the Queen wants to know about the people and the planet of Tatooine.
And she's like, I'm going to have my assistant stay back and clean the shit off the robots.
Qui-Gon reluctantly finally agrees to take her with him. After making it to the spaceport of Mos Eisley, Jar Jar Binks steps in a pile of shit. Oh, wait, would we call it the pile of shit got stepped on by Jar Jar?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I don't know the order here and which one's the pile of shit. The instinct to not take Jar Jar is so good because, and this is aside from him being annoying to watch, he is a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Every situation he's in, he causes not only problems, but like mortal problems.
Maybe the rest of the crew was annoyed by him so much, like, you brought him here, you have to take him with you.
You take
also,
him.
Maybe you'll leave him in the desert.
Maybe just kind of, I don't know, trade him to Watto for something.
Qui-Gon talks about moisture farms and how it's dangerous, so stay close to me. And we're treated to visions of all sorts of weird space desert stuff. There are even Jawas here. Qui-Gon, R2, Jar Jar, and Padme settle on a shop, and they decide to enter the dirty hut. And as they do, we're introduced, finally, to the star of this movie. It's Watto!
He takes over from Nute Gunray as the star for a bit.
Watto is a Toydarian junk driver who even has a backstory, by the way. He was originally a soldier back on Toydaria, but he suffered an injury which forced him to search for a new profession. He just could no longer be a soldier. He eventually made his way to Tatooine, where he witnessed Jawas sell used goods and decided, hey, I'm a savvy business monster. I can start my own business.
Hey, I'm a flying gremlin who got hurt in the Gremlin War.
Watto's Junk Shop is that business that he starts. The actor who voiced Watto, who's Welshman Andrew Seccombe, also acted as him on set to help establish eye lines and be an anchor for animators. So he did the Jar Jar thing. He's in a costume with a stupid hat on, and they had to look at that stupid hat and act.
Now, could he actually fly, or was that CGI?
He could. No, this is one of the rare instances where they use practical effects. What is funny is because he's flying, because my initial instinct was like, wait, Watto's really small. And then I realized, oh no, he's just flittering around.
How big is Watto? He's not very big.
And overall, I don't know, what is he, like 3.5 feet
He's probably
tall?
about that big, yeah.
But about that wide. He's got a belly. This Watto, we were talking about R2 being stacked. Watto,
yeah.
Man.
He's thick with 2 C's. I guess that makes sense because flying around only works your wing muscles.
He's got powerful wing muscles.
Oh, yeah, he's ripped in the wings.
The animator for this movie found syncing the lip movements for Watto with the dialogue difficult, so they decided to chip one of Watto's teeth so he could speak out of the side of his mouth. So pay attention when he scrambles out words out of his face. You'll kind of notice that's what he does.
What other decisions were made about the way this character talks?
We're not going to talk about that, Brian. One of the original designs for Watto actually featured him with a cigar, which makes total sense, right?
Put it back in, CGI it in.
Though I do wonder if like his hot Toydarian thong outfit was like an original design or if that came too late in the process. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. I mean, the temperatures there kind of warrant it.
He's got it hanging out. He just looks like a fat guy at the beach wearing a Speedo.
He definitely looks like that.
Oh, by the way, I told Katie, my girlfriend, one time, straight-faced. I did not waver, and I'm good at this when I try. Did you know that Watto's played by Paul Giamatti? And she believed it. And for a while, before I finally revealed, what are you talking about?
Well,
no,
the man just slips into a role.
I mean, the same head.
Yeah.
He has a snout.
Just cut the whole body off and replace it with the body of a small dog. Put a thong on it.
A fat dog.
Put a thong on it and some wings. Wow. Watto is a weird character.
Paul Giamatti, he can nail any role. When the group enters the shop, a doorbell chime goes off, which is really funny to me considering how dirty and gross the junk shop is.
He's still got a doorbell.
Watto says, good day to you, but in Huttese. Of course, this is a Hutt control planet, so most of the creatures here would speak Hutt naturally.
And at this point, Watto's still operating under the pretense that he needs to be nice to anyone.
He gets up from presumably looking at Toydarian porn, right? That's what he's doing.
I think so. And what would... No, we don't need to talk about what that would look like.
No,
We've talked about Watto's physical appearance enough.
Well, he flitters over to Qui-Gon with his big bat wings and asks, what do you guys need? Qui-Gon reveals the parts he needs for his ship, and he says it in basic. So Watto then begins speaking in kind. And by the way, basic is English. So Watto then begins speaking in kind, and let's go ahead and listen to what he sounds like now that we got some English here.
Ah, yes! Nubian! We have lots of that.
Oh my.
That's the choice that they made.
Well, Watto screams in Huttese for his boy to get here, and we see a dirty, dirty little boy with a bad haircut, and he comes scampering in.
A little bowl cut.
Watto tells him to watch the store because he's got some selling to do. He then tells Qui-Gon in basic, let me take the back, You'll find just what you need. Say what's a tall drink of water like you doing on the desert, I've
got some Toydarian videos for sale.
I got shit that'll blow your mind, man. As he heads out with Watto, Qui-Gon sees the walking disaster Jar Jar playing with some junk and realizes, hey, I'm better getting out in front of this than just letting it happen. So he says, do not touch anything. And then he heads out his way. Jar Jar sticks out his tongue at the powerful space wizard who has saved his life multiple times. Still in the shop, we do hear this orb-headed little boy speak finally. He talks to Padme, and she reacts precisely how the audience does.
Are you an angel? What?
What?
This is 2 times in the movie that they just mimic the audience so well. The other one being Obi-Wan meeting Jar Jar.
What?
What?
Are you an angel? What the fuck are you talking about?
Let me tell you a lot of facts about myself.
Yeah, he continues. I heard the deep space pilots talk about them. They're the most beautiful creatures in the universe. And okay, you know what? I'm going to give him credit for saying smooth things.
Yeah.
The delivery and the fact that he said bulk haircut little boy didn't pan out for him. Well, that's the
thing is like he has more composure talking to Natalie Portman than I certainly would. He does it with the enthusiasm of a little boy. So it comes across as what Star Wars is based on, which is a little boy hitting on an adult woman and the repercussions.
9 and 14 are their ages. She's 5 years older than them here.
So
she's a teenager.
They're supposed to be 14 and 9 here.
Mm-hmm.
That clarifies something for me. You know how in real life they're 18 and 9.
Right.
Which is a lot weirder.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, the other one's weird too.
Yeah, but yeah.
But it evens out a lot faster in terms of the years going by.
Right. And so basically, if you think about this, if Anakin's then 18, she's 23.
That makes a lot more sense.
It does.
Than 18 and 27.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here's the thing about the age different things. Obviously, it's individual cases.
Yeah,
but I feel like when you're younger, it's not a big deal until it's a real big deal. And then that gap closes.
And eventually it's like whatever because everyone's old.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's kind of just really not the fault of anyone but maybe the casting because they appear so different in age here.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like Jake Lloyd, he's a young 9, if that makes sense.
Well, and remember, she's this queen, essentially. So she's regal and very adult and grown up. So that doesn't help it either. Of course, maybe this would have worked, this little flirtatious banter that this little boy has provided. But unfortunately, Padme responds by immediately slamming him into the friend zone. She says, you're a funny little boy.
That's her follow-up to what?
Well, this little boy tells her he's lived there almost all of his life and was originally owned by Gardula the Hutt, who lost him and his mother to Watto in a pod race bet. Padme, who's shocked, says, you're a slave? And the little boy says, I'm a person. My name is Anakin, which is a stupid name.
Yeah. It's the kind of name you give your kid that kid might have things wrong with him.
Buckle up, kids, because we got 5 movies of this stupid kid.
He's just all over the place. You'll like him better eventually later on, trust me.
Meanwhile, Jar Jar accidentally activates a pit droid, and wackiness ensues.
Oh, most of what goes on Tatooine is Jar Jar accidentally messing a thing up. Which, I mean, I guess is really not an accident, because Qui-Gon brought Jar Jar.
He knew better.
Yeah.
And yet he still did it.
That's a good time to go ahead and take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll get to meet the sexiest creature in all of Star Wars.
Do you sit on your ass all day throwing chance cubes in your mom's basement?
You walk on your feet like a total sleemo?
Do you drive your pod racer like Yoda drives his Chevy Celebrity to the unemployment office? When you enter a competition, do you play by the rules? Then you need to try Sebulba's hot carbonated dog drink. I used to be unsure of myself, but then I drank sabotage. Now I know all of my actions are perfectly legal.
Hello, my name is George Lucas from Modesto, California. When I was a younger man, I was focused on writing artsy scripts with my co-founder of the American film production company, American Zoetrope, with the famed director Francis Ford Coppola. But after discovering sabotage, I realized I could write about space and become a very rich man with his own ranch to play around on.
The sounds of my inner screams were no longer like music to my audio receptors. Then I drank sabotage, and now I'm back to my old self again.
Hello, my name is Horace Weatherby. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. I was really struggling with my confidence at family and social gatherings and at work outings. Anytime I needed to speak in public, but then I bought a case of sabotage and I've been hooked ever since, and now I have severe heart problems.
Hasta wahota shan, to be like nok.
Meanwhile, Watto and Qui-Gon are taking a look at the hyperdrive generator that the Jedi needs, and Watto, flapping along, questions Qui-Gon about how he's going to pay for this, to which the Jedi responds he has 20,000 Republic dataries. Watto tells him, look, that shit's not gonna fly. Republic credits ain't gonna work out here, man. I'm fucking Watto.
At this point, I'm on Watto's side.
Sure.
Because I can't go throw American dollars at someone and say, no, you will accept this in another country.
Take these lira I have.
Especially on another planet.
Well, Qui-Gon Jinn, being the upstanding space wizard he is, decides he's going to use the Force to get what he wants. So he waves his hand around and tells Watto, Republic credits will do just fine. But Watto, in his keen mind's eye, he sees right through Qui-Gon's plan, and he lets him know just what's up.
Credits will do fine.
No, they won't. What, you think you're some kind of Jedi waving your hand around like that? I'm a Toydarian. My trick's gonna work on me. Only money.
Wow,
Oy
so we have this large-nosed, stodgy creature who can only be persuaded by money.
Cut off a pound of flesh, eh?
Yeah.
Nice job, George. Nice
well
job.
done, Mr. Lucas.
Jeez. Well, this puts Qui-Gon and crew in quite the pickle. So Qui-Gon just kind of storms off out of the store angrily.
Couldn't Qui-Gon just pick up Watto and just kind of chuck him somewhere and get it?
You would think, well, here is...
It's kind of important that they get this thing to save the whole galaxy.
Well, my argument is going to be he's Jedi. He wouldn't do such things. But he's also the Jedi that just goes with the flow and does whatever the Force tells him. So if the Force was like, no, just cut this guy in half, no one will miss him. Yeah, I think he would have done it.
Well, and it's kind of a greater good thing of being like, I can pay you for this back later, but there won't be a you if the dark side wins.
Watto groans and complains about Outlanders to Anakin, and he eventually tells the kid, which he owns, by the way, he can go home early after he cleans the racks.
Very how nice of him.
Well, the little boy responds with something no little boy has ever said legitimately, which is a hearty, yippee!
Something no other boy has said legitimately is a good way to describe like all Anakin dialogue.
Yes. And I mean, this just reeks of Lucas sitting in a room alone.
Yes.
This is him and his beard. And he's like, Eureka, you've got it, George.
What did I used to say whenever excited as a young boy?
With a beard.
Let's see, I probably said yippee.
Before I made THX 98 or what, I can't remember what that movie's called.
George, you're a genius. You've done it. Well, Qui-Gon radios back to Obi-Wan on the ship and tries to see if they have anything they can sell to raise the funds to pay Watto. They can't come up with anything, so Qui-Gon just does, well, pretty much the laziest thing and just goes, okay, whatever, it'll work out. Whatever.
Yeah, and this is the part where I'm like, Qui-Gon, come on, because I know he is trusting that a solution will present itself, but it is kind of like, this is the part of him where I'm like, he seems kind of religious to me.
Yeah, kind of.
It's kind of a let go, let God type thing, which Qui-Gon sometimes is that way with the Force, if that makes sense to me, because he follows it.
So blindly.
Yeah, it's almost his God in a way.
And by the way, this communicator that he's calling Obi-Wan with, That's actually just like a lady's razor that the set group just painted.
Really?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
That's all it is. Comes up in a couple of scenes, and it was just whatever they had on hand. Now, this next bit I was going to try to just kind of gloss over. It involves a bunch of Jar Jar wackiness that no one cares about.
Oh, I don't want you to gloss over
I'm
it
afraid
at all.
I can't do that because, Brian, this is where we're introduced to one of your favorite characters. In the history of Star Wars, you see Jar Jar starts being a weird dipshit, and he tries to eat food he stumbles upon across the street when a big mouth slimy puppet monster gets mad and says, hey, you're going to pay for that. When Jar Jar hears that the Gorg costs 7 whoopie, just so you know, he spits out the Gorg, which flies across the alley and lands in the soup of a leather-clad monster who's now covered in soup and is pissed. This monster turns out to be Sebulba, a particularly
Goddamn right it does.
nasty little dog, and he's a central character to our plot. Sebulba knocks Jar Jar to the ground, but just before he knocks the shit out of him, Jar Jar's savior, a small boy, arrives to take care of it. He shit-talks the angry leather daddy monster, and Anakin tells Sebulba that Jar Jar's a big-time outlander, and he'd hate to see that Doug get diced.
Oh
For the
my.
next time they race.
Which sounds like a real threat.
Getting crunched and diced. Which would you rather be?
Probably crunched. I think I could fix my bones more than if I'm in pieces.
I don't know.
If
Dice sounds bad.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I mean,
It's
dice
like-
sounds better.
I think dice to me is like I'm falling from a very large height through a net, and then I come through the other end in pieces, shaped like through the net.
Like
you know?
that Resident Evil movie, the first one where they had
Yes.
the laser beams that were grid-shaped. And
Probably like the most fun of those, maybe,
Yeah.
that I've seen.
I like Mia Jovovich.
Yeah.
She's fun.
Yeah, she is. Another thought I had here is Sebulba, he's got a rude attitude.
He's the Raphael.
Yeah,
of the
he's not
Turtles
going
here.
to take any shit or anything. And Jar Jar is a good guy. He's one of our heroes, allegedly. That's George Lucas's intent, anyway.
Okay.
And he's like stealing from poor street vendors and spitting food at a guy.
Are you really trying to turn this around?
I'm saying Sebulba may not be the hero we deserve, but he's the hero that we have.
What?
He's
draws
taking care of
you-
a problem, and that's Jar Jar, who comes out of nowhere and just starts spitting on the locals.
And trying to eat random food off the street.
Yeah, he sounds like a rude American to me.
As you can guess, Sebulba has not taken kindly to Anakin's stinging words, and he decides his best course of action is to threaten death upon a little boy.
Well, okay. Again, any little boy you're threatening death to, that's bad. You don't want to be threatening little kids. But if
If
the
you
boy
are.
is Darth Vader,
This is murdering baby Hitler.
that's
right here.
that's
is what
I'm
we're
saying.
Okay.
Is Sebulba the chosen one, the Neo of the Star Wars universe?
You write your thesis out.
Okay.
And we'll discuss it
By
amongst
the
groups.
time we wrap up this podcast, this entire series, I'll have an answer for you.
Okay, good. Sebulba even says if Anakin wasn't a slave, he'd squash him right here, right now. Anakin then, of course, has a great comeback, which is, yeah, it'd be a real shame if you had to pay for me.
Which actually is kind of
Awful.
just the most mortifying thing ever. And also that, yeah, the only reason he's not killing a little child is that he's property.
Yes, exactly.
Sebulba's just the worst.
Well, by now, Qui-Gon has realized that Jar Jar has caused a scene, and he thanks Anakin for saving the Gungan. He tells Jar Jar basically just quit fucking around, man. You're screwing this up for all of us.
And why did we bring you?
Anakin, Qui-Gon, Padme, and Jar Jar have now apparently found their way to some witch's small food stand, and Qui-Gon is clearly distracted by something because Anakin has to tell him twice to take some delicious pallies from him. It's here that the Desert Witch says, "My bones are aching, Nanny. Means the storms are coming. You better get home quick." And that is not exaggeration. That is in this movie.
Definitely. It's again kind of a disparate part of another kind of movie wrapped into this one. Very weird. I read recently this report that the Weather Channel actually only uses witches when coming up with their forecasts, especially for storms.
That makes sense. I mean, witches are best at predicting certain things.
Witches don't get stitches.
Little Anakin, he trusts the Desert Witch's warning. He asks our group if they have shelter. And they say, well, we'll head back to our ship. Anakin says, you'll never make it in time. Instead, just come to my house. And obviously, his mom's going to be totally cool with this cadre of weirdos that Anakin has willingly dragged back to their
Mom,
home.
can I have a sleepover with this?
Well, the gang heads that way. And arriving at the house, the boy calls for his mother and says, Mom, I'm home. I brought Liam Neeson and Natalie Portman with me.
Which would be pretty cool.
That would be awesome. Well, Qui-Gon introduces himself, and we're told that this is Anakin's mother, Shmi Skywalker.
Perhaps
Shmi.
top 5 worst naming job in the Star Wars universe.
She doesn't seem surprised at all that he has dragged this group of strangers to her home, so I imagine he does this frequently.
And did you find it weird whenever Qui-Gon takes her hand and kisses the top of it and stares longingly into her eyes for a little too long?
Well, here's the thing. Qui-Gon touches her a lot in this movie. That when they're pod racing later, he's got his hand on her back.
Mm-hmm. And he's constantly like, don't worry, Shmi. Your boy will be all right. I've got a feeling, Shmi. What are you doing later, Shmi? That sort of stuff.
Meanwhile, Anakin sees the opportunity to be alone with the hot chick, so he tells Padme, I'm building a robot you want to see in my bedroom. Except that's not at all what's happening here. Actually, he brings Padme into his bedroom to show him his robot that he is actually building.
And this is better than anything else he could have shown her, as it turns out.
Yeah, I'm certain you're very excited for this part. He asks Padme what she thinks of this robot he's built, and channeling her inner Brian Vaughn, she looks at him, smiles, and replies with the most awe-filled, he's wonderful I've ever heard.
She calls him perfect, also.
And being fresh to the world, C-3PO isn't quite as full of himself as he will be, so even he's flattered by that perfect comment. 3PO starts wandering around the room, and for the first time in their robot lives, R2-D2 and C-3PO lay eyes on one another in what will amount to be the longest domestic partnership the galaxy will ever see.
And one of my favorite on-screen coupledoms, I would say.
And the way they bicker and argue.
Oh, it's so great. It's so cute, too.
R2 apparently mentions via beep and whistle that 3PO is nude, and it most definitely turns him on. And 3PO has a very 3PO prudish kind of reaction. He's just, and he hefts
I must
paws.
cover my fuses. When I was a kid, I was kind of surprised to find out that the purpose of C-3PO initially was to help Anakin's mom out around the house.
Well, the funny thing to me is that if you think about this now, this is skipping ahead a bit, Anakin leaves to go train as a Jedi, and he leaves C-3PO here with Shmi. We find out in the next movie that Shmi is kidnapped by Tusken Raiders after being sold to be married.
Yeah.
Let's not get into that yet. But anyway, that means C-3PO went with her to this new place. So when Anakin and Padme show up there looking for his mother, C-3PO's there with Owen Lars. And then, of course, 30 years later or whatever, when they try to escape Darth Vader on the Tantive 4, I think it's called, their ship, they land in Tatooine, get caught by the Jawas, ends up being sold to Lars. Now, there's a thing where they say, we wiped C-3PO's memory at some point, so he doesn't know, R2 does know. But wouldn't Lars be like another one of these sassy asshole robots?
Yes.
He would remember.
He would have to. Yeah, exactly.
So they pigeonhole this in, and it's kind of awkward, but it's fun. Whatever.
Yeah, of course. And it's C-3PO.
Yeah, you'd be pissed if he wasn't in this movie.
He has to be
continuity.
And he also has to be in the first one. I mean, he's such a major character.
While the droid catcalling goes on, Obi-Wan, Captain Panaka, and the Queen receive a Zoom hologram message from C.O. Bibble. He's back. He tells them they must contact him because the Nebulian people are being slaughtered. But Obi-Wan senses this as a ruse to establish a location signal and tells them to send no reply. When he relays this information to Qui-Gon, the Elder Jedi agrees and realizes that time is running out. The screen wipes and we're treated to the Coruscant skyline at night. The shadowy figure of Darth Sidious comes walking around the balcony walkway alongside his apprentice, Darth Maul. Maul reveals that the two know Tatooine is where our group of heroes have landed, and Maul will have no trouble finding them. Sidious tells him to attack the Jedi first. With them out of the way, it will be easy to force Padme to return to Naboo to sign Nute Gunray's perfectly legal treaty.
There's nothing wrong with it. You can have your lawyer look over the fine print. He won't find shit.
Nothing. Rune went through that with a fine-tooth comb. Now, this scene is notable because in the entirety of this movie, in case you didn't know this, Darth Maul only speaks a total of 2 lines, 31 words. This is it. This is the only time he speaks in this movie.
I hadn't actually ever thought about that until I needed to make notes to do a podcast about it. And it is also not the voice you would expect Darth Maul to have. It's just a guy's voice.
Yeah, now, and I previously mentioned that Ray Park was the actor who played Darth Maul in the movies, the physical actor, but that's not 100% of it. Lucas felt Park's voice wasn't intimidating enough, so he brought in a different actor to dub the lines.
He brought in his neighbor or something.
It didn't work. No, wait till you find out who it is. The actor who voices Darth Maul is Peter Serafinowicz.
What? Really?
You know who that is?
I do, and I did not know that.
Yeah, you might recognize him. He's got a very distinct face and eyes. He's been in tons of shows. He was the lead role in that weird, gritty The Tick reboot from a few years ago. I remember him from Parks and Rec. He was the rich Brit who hires Andy Dwyer to do stuff. So yeah, very famous actor.
That's really, really surprising. It's also surprising that that's the direction he went with it, which is just kind of mannered and calm.
So eventually they replaced the voice actor from Maul. And what they did is they got in Sam Witwer, who is I think he was a physical actor as well, but he's done a lot of voice work. He's done a lot of video game work. He was actually the voice actor for Galen Merrick, a.k.a. Starkiller, in the Force Unleashed video games. Those were fun.
I'll take another opportunity here to just say I really like it when voice actors get voice acting work over millionaire, regular actors.
Yeah, no, it drives me nuts.
It's a specific field.
He does a much better job than Serafinowicz did, and, I don't blame Peter Serafinowicz. It's just the way it went.
No,
Witwer's
if
great
you're
for the
that
role.
guy, if you're like a career British actor and you're getting Star Wars money, take the money and do your 31 words.
Absolutely. And I'll almost assuredly get into this stuff throughout this podcast run, but essentially the Sith, as a concept, they do the opposite of the Jedi in that rather than fighting your strong emotions in the interest of balance and peace, they channel those emotions and use them to further their connection to the dark side. So basically, Maul's main emotion is what you would guess rage.
I do think it's funny that, at least on screen, and actually, this is a question I have for you.
Mm-hmm.
With the Sith sort of channeling negative feelings, or just emotions in general, I don't know if it's specified that they must be negative. The only one we really see on screen ever is anger and vengeance, right? Can they use other emotions the same way?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you an example that you've seen, which is in The Force Awakens, when Kylo is hurt and he's fighting Rey, he starts smacking himself in the chest. It's pain. He's using his pain to fuel his anger and power, and he's not a Sith. But
can they use how should I phrase this? Can they use like a less incel-ish type of, can they be like super jazzed about a thing and direct that as Sith to get their job done?
I think it has to be a negative emotion.
Which does make sense, since they're supposed to represent like the flip side of the coin of humanity or whatever.
But on that note, I mean, the Jedi, the whole thing is you can't have emotion at all.
Yeah,
you can't have happiness.
Which is also extremely flawed.
It is.
So you know what? My complaint is redacted because that's the downside of both, right? You can only channel power from emotions you don't want to have if you're a Sith, essentially.
That's a good way to put it.
And if you're a Jedi, you can only refute any emotions that try to enter you.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's a tortured way to live either way.
Well, Witwer did exactly what we're saying, and he used the rage. So when you hear Darth Maul's voice on the Clone Wars or whatever, it's very much like this. He's just seething with anger.
He's got wrestler voice, which is what you need for this.
Then it works great, yeah. Even when he's a big old half spider.
Yeah, what? Well, we'll get to that too, I'm sure.
We will. Anyway, back at Casa de Skywalker, there's a lot of talk about slavery, and Padme is disgusted that it happens. And she should be. Let me preface that because the way I said it.
You said it like, I don't know why.
Who could believe this?
I know Anakin's annoying, but slavery's bad.
But Shmi says, sure, there are Republic slavery laws, but we're so far out here on Tatooine that the Republic doesn't even exist to us. It's about here that our little boy hero pipes up, asking slyly if anyone has heard of pod racing. Have you heard of pod racing, Brian?
Me? Yes, I'm all about pod racing. He slipped it in earlier that he'd built a really cool pod racer to preface him to talking about it here. So I feel like this is any little boy around 10, where whatever your one biggest interest is, you want to tell anyone you encounter about it. And for Anakin, that's how cool I am. Like, look at what I can build.
Well, it just so happens that Qui-Gon has also heard of pod racing. He says it's dangerous, and Anakin replies that, I'm the only human that can do it. Qui-Gon tells him he must have Jedi reflexes if Anakin is capable of racing pods, and just as he does, Jar Jar sticks his tongue out trying to grab a piece of fruit off of the table, and Qui-Gon snatches the Gungan's tongue, tells him, don't do that, and look, we get it, George, this is not subtle.
Yeah.
Anakin starts babbling about his dream where he once became a Jedi and freed all the slaves, and then he says, are you here to free us? Qui-Gon wastes no time to go, no fucking way, man. No.
I mean, if a slave happens to be freed while I'm here, fine. But honestly, despite, again, I'm a Jedi warrior, I really don't care.
Anakin has figured out, of course, at this point that the tall, hairy man is a Jedi, and surely a Jedi, someone he's heard all of his life is a beacon of good.
Yeah.
And a true hero will save him and his mother were owned by people.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're looking at fucking Rob Roy here, and he's not doing anything about it. This is a guy who traveled to Eastern Europe to save one person. His offspring, I guess.
And he says, no, but thank you for the food, though.
I know you're a slave.
Thank you for giving me
But thank
your
you
food.
for giving not only just me, but my crew of 18 people all your food.
And this big, clumsy monster who probably ate all of the food at the table.
And who uses this dinner as another excuse to say yet again, how wooed.
Well, actually, what Qui-Gon does is instead give up all the details of his super secret mission to this weird little boy and his mom. He tells Anakin he's headed to Coruscant and needs to repair their ship, but unfortunately they don't have any money or supplies to trade. Oh, I'm sorry, let me back up. What I meant to say was no nuttin' moolah to trade, as Jar Jar puts it. But these junk dealers, they have a weakness, says Shmi. They love to gamble. Any given Thursday, you can find Watto down at the Wookiee tracks betting on the racers, and every other Friday when the space payments come in, blows most of it on scratchers tickets. We know that.
Oh, yeah.
Loves to gamble.
He's down there and he justifies it because he's like, well, a big part of this is tax and it goes to the schools. My kids can't eat. No.
Well, there's a solution to this problem, Brian.
What's that?
Solution? Pod racing.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, because, I mean, as we all know, Tatooine is entirely supported by its gambling economy.
Well, it turns out that Anakin, like you said earlier, has been building a pod racer behind Watto's back for several years, and Qui-Gon should now tell Watto he won it in a game of chance, then tell him if Watto allows Anakin to drive the pod, pilot, whatever you want to call it.
I guess it would be piloting, yeah.
Well, they can work out a deal for the parts that Qui-Gon needs. Of course, Shmi says, no way, this is my child. Pod racing is dangerous. I'm not going to let him do this. He's 9 years old. Of course he thinks he's invincible.
And what is the deal with Qui-Gon's, like, moral flexibility all of a sudden? Like, I'm going to tell 9 complicated lies versus, again, just finding a way to just take it and give him the money later or something. I don't know. Just go save the world rather than let's stick around a few days and see how the Boonta Eve race goes.
The Force, Brian. That's our response anytime it's like, what's the question here? Why should this happen? The Force.
I don't say this often, but you and I would have done a better job of this.
Somehow.
Like
there are not many things
Qui-Gon
we
and
would.
Obi-Wan are. Like,
Yeah.
it's wild.
Which one would you be? I guess I have to be Qui-Gon. I'm the same height. I'm the tall one.
Yeah, but I am
But you're
6
older.
months older versus their age difference, which is like 15 years or
Where's your
something.
Padawan braid?
I mean, we could both have Padawan braids. We are long-haired men.
Well, young Anakin here makes quite the argument against Shmi's protests. He says, Mom, you say the problem with the universe is no one actually helps anyone. And this stops her right in her tracks. She immediately relents.
I'm glad she did not pursue a legal career.
Outside of Watto's shop, Padme tells Qui-Gon there's no way the Queen would approve of them putting their lives at stake on some random little boy. So Qui-Gon says, well, Mrs. I'm not the Queen.
Definitely. Why? How would you know what the Queen thinks?
What the, air quotes, Queen doesn't know won't hurt her. He heads in the junk shop to the sound of Padme pouting and well, I don't approve.
Qui-Gon is so principled. When you get this guy on gambling planet Tatooine and he's lying and juking and jiving and saying, who cares what the Queen thinks? And Shmi, what are you doing for dinner?
The Force. Qui-Gon and Watto haggle out a deal, and somewhere in here we find out that Anakin actually destroyed Watto's pod in the last race. Although he claims he didn't crash due to mistake, Sebulba flashed his vents at him, which sounds naughty. And that caused him to crash the pod racer, but actually he saved it. I guess he just broke it less. And maybe I'm giving George Lucas too much credit here, but I do feel like this was at least there to introduce a bit of doubt into the situation. You know, Padme just complained like, why are you putting full trust in this little boy we just met? And then we find out maybe he's not as good as he has been bragging
and like
about.
he hasn't even like finished a race. You know, we don't know what he can or can't do, but we obviously can tell he's quite ingenuitive.
I guess then that would add a little bit of tension to it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The tension was already there because we know we're about to watch pod racing and we know we're going to have to put up with pod racing. So we're already tense. You don't need it.
Yeah, we are gripping our seats. We're on the edge of our seats. Padme questioning Qui-Gon a lot is supposed to be us, the audience, saying, wait, why would you stake all this on this little boy? The problem is she seems too correct.
Yeah, she
in
does.
a sense. You need to still mostly be on Qui-Gon's side. But rewatching this, I found myself being like, she's right, man. This is really short-sighted.
Well, one thing that they didn't do well here is actually do what the books and the comics and everything has done, saying Qui-Gon really is just, the Force is telling him stuff.
Right.
The Force is saying, nope, there's something special here. Go with it. See what
like
happens.
a David Berkowitz situation.
Exactly, but they didn't show that in the movie. They just instead made him make weird decisions.
And Liam Neeson, for his part, always has this sly look like he knows what he's doing, which is a good way to play that if he's getting information from the Force, sort of internally.
And eventually Qui-Gon and Watto agree on a deal, and Watto gives him one of those like low fives. Bam, they smack hands. It's pretty cool.
What do you think Watto's hand feels like?
Is it slimy or is it rough?
I think it's really coarse and rough, and
I think it's both.
It might cut you.
And after you pull your hand back, there's grime. In the next scene, Qui-Gon splays up on the roof of Anakin's hut and calls Obi-Wan on his lady's razor to tell him his batshit crazy plan. And you can kind of tell Obi-Wan here thinks this is really stupid, but he doesn't want to get yelled at or preached at. So he just kind of sighs and says, what are we going to do if this doesn't work out? Qui-Gon avoids that question and then says, I don't know, there's something about this shitty little boy I ran into. And then he just hangs up on him.
And this is the very first time that Qui-Gon bothers everybody about how cool and great Anakin is. I got the same sense you did, that Obi-Wan essentially did not even know why he's getting this phone call to a certain degree.
I guess he was probably just bored. So he's like, this is great.
He's like, I'll call my friend on my racer. Not Motorola racer. Yeah. Those didn't exist yet. But women's shaving razors did.
Well, Shmi rounds the corner right about now, and the two converse about Anakin. There's some really cool lore stuff here about how the Jedi collect Force-sensitive children and all that. But what I really want to make sure to mention is that Anakin is Jesus.
Yeah.
Because it's here we find out that evidently Shmi there was no father.
Yeah.
Immaculate conception. She's just like, I don't know. I was working at Watto's shop one day, and then boom, pregnant.
Which, if I'm listening to that, I'm like, what'd you do with Watto? Anakin is Jesus, and this brings up my question that I had for you. Does he have a dad anywhere in canon?
Yes-ish. So what it is Palpatine is being trained by Darth Plagueis, his master.
The Wise.
Who knows how to cheat death itself, or kind of. Anyway, they perform this big ritual, this big Sith ritual, and this causes the Force to shift and basically gives more power to the dark side. And there's a lot of debate to this, but essentially I'll tell this concept of it.
Okay.
And that this is when Anakin was born as a response of the light side of the Force fighting back against Plagueis and Palpatine's Sith ritual. They shifted the balance of the Force to the dark side, and the light side of the Force went, shit, man, we got to put a bull-haired kid.
So the light side said, we will respond by inseminating this poor slave woman.
Yes.
With our savior, who will have the most power of anyone ever.
And that's why he has such a high midichlorian count, we'll find out later, and he's the greatest Force user.
Because they just kind of willed it to happen.
Yep. That's how it works.
Because the Force.
And that really sucks
I'm
for
learning.
Because Shmi was like,
she didn't ask for that.
She didn't even get to fool around once.
No.
It just kind of happened, and now she's stuck with that little bull-haired boy.
And he's not even like a cool kid. He's so annoying.
All the while this talk is going on, we can see Anakin working on his pod racer. So as soon as their conversation finishes, we head over to the racer where Anakin's group of chaotic, dirty friends giggle. Of course, of note, we have Kitster, George Lucas's daughter, Katie, who plays one of these kids, a jealous, very jealous redheaded boy. We also have asymmetrical bun girl and Wald.
And which one of them proclaims, wow, a real astro droid?
That would be...
Was that Kitster? Probably. Kitster's a nerd.
Anakin is bragging about his pod racer to his friends, and he tells them, look, that's not even the half of it. I'm in the Boonta Eve pod race tomorrow. The kids, as you mentioned, aren't even slightly impressed with these facts.
I'm in the Boonta race tomorrow. What? With this?
Oh, no, you're okay, Annie.
You've been working on that thing for years. It's never gonna run. Come on, let's go and play ball. Keep racing, Annie. You're gonna be Bug Squad.
Look, Annie, I know you're entered into this hyper-dangerous race, which everyone on this godforsaken planet loves as our only entertainment option. You'll be traveling at insanely fast
speeds.
Complicated. It's complicated. You're competing against the best racers the universe has ever seen, including Ben Quadinaros. And I totally get you're likely going to be a huge celebrity for this. And if you win, you could be super wealthy. Let me tell you what. I got a ball back home. I'm going to spend some fucking time playing with my ball.
It's the best thing George Lucas could come up with.
They're like robot, pod racer, all these cool-ass things, aliens you've never seen. They're like, no, ball.
Let's see, what would the children do in space? Ball. That's what they would do, I think.
That's a good Lucas.
I've watched a couple interviews recently for the first time in years because of us doing this.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
And then secondly here, Bug Squash, which is what the kid tells Anakin. You'll be Bug Squash.
Yeah.
That's actually a thing in the Star Wars universe. I wanted to tell you a little bit about it. It's a big gourd, like a plant, and it grows. It looks like a beetle, shaped like a beetle. But if you don't pick it just as it ripens, it explodes in like a big pile of goo. So that's what he means.
Can you still eat it?
Bug Squash. Not once it explodes.
Oh,
no.
okay.
None of that was real.
Well, see, but why wouldn't I think that it is real? Because it's Star Wars. Like, it's just bonkers stuff just lining the walls.
You bought right into it. Point proven.
I had no doubt at all that would be part of like their extended world.
Anyway, now Anakin warns Jar Jar to avoid the lightning bolts spewing from his pod racer,
that's
which
good.
Has to be said, apparently.
Yeah, and then like now that it's said, for sure, there's no way Jar Jar will encounter it.
He promptly sticks his face in the lightning bolts and gets with his hands stuck in the pod racer engine. At one point, C-3PO even says to R2, this Jar Jar creature is a bit much. C-3PO said that.
Yeah, he calls him odd, which is polite, given what I would say, which is a disaster. And why do we have him here? Why is he part of the team? When you were doing your team assembly, you said we got a couple of Jedis. We have a queen of Naboo, for instance. Cool robots. What else do we need? Like a lizard man in a vest who just fucks everything up he touches.
Life-size lizard that can't not break something.
Yeah, every team needs one.
Well, at this point, it's just bleep, bloop, blurp, just comedy. And it's bad
slapstick,
comedy.
CGI slapstick.
Anakin decides to try powering up the pod racer, and much to everyone's surprise, it works. Fires right up. So that night, Qui-Gon and Anakin are sitting out on the sand porch. Anakin doesn't shut up at all. He just blathers on and on about the stars and how he's going to be the first person to visit all of them. Qui-Gon just kind of goes, sure, well, whatever you say, bud. He takes a sample of his blood. After Shmi calls the boy to bed, Qui-Gon phones up Obi-Wan.
Qui-Gon says, do you think the boy's asleep, Shmi?
Qui-Gon calls Obi-Wan and asks him to test this blood sample for something people hate almost as much as Jar Jar, midichlorians.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan decides to check out this blood, and he says, holy shit, Qui-Gon, over 20,000 midichlorian count.
Which is really high. I only have like 2.
You have 2? I didn't even get to 2. I got 1.
Wow. I'm double. I have the double M count of you.
Well, apparently 20,000 is more than Grandmaster Yoda.
When I was a kid, when I watched this movie, that made me angry. I don't know why. I loved Yoda so much, and it just made me angry that this boy who had done nothing but aggravate me this whole movie is like the most powerful person.
Well, you've just introduced Star Wars from here for the next few years. Obi-Wan asked Qui-Gon, what does that mean, though? He has that many... I've never seen that before.
Fair question. What does that mean?
And Qui-Gon goes, And that's it. Scene over. It's night, and we see a ship streaking across the desert skyline. It's Maul, and he's in his ship, the Scimitar, or Scimitar. I don't remember which way that's pronounced.
I think it's Scimitar.
That's what I think, but someone corrected me once, and it's stuck with me for 20 years.
That's happened to me a lot of times, where I will then say a thing for forever, and then people will correct me on that one, and I never know.
It's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
The computer is inches to my right. I could type it in. I could look it up. Not going to do that.
No, why don't you just use the Force? It'll tell you.
My count's too low.
Oh, that's right. You only have 1. I can do that with 2. That's the sort of stuff I can do.
Oh, that's the next level up, sure. The Zabrak Sith steps out onto the dunes, and he uses his macro binoculars to locate a city on the horizon. He activates and sends out multiple probe droids to search for the missing Jedi and Queen. The next day, we're backstage in the pod racer garage, and Watto and Qui-Gon are discussing the upcoming event.
Pod race garage is also what I called it.
Is it really?
Yes. I didn't know what it was.
Just gibberish I pulled out of my head.
Yeah,
that's funny.
I didn't know where we were supposed to be. I had no sense of the geography of this.
They should give you a map each time a movie comes out.
Also, I would enjoy that.
Well, like those Lord of the Rings maps, right? It's like, here's Mordor, here's a mountain, here's where an elf lives.
When I read the Lord of the Rings books and when I read the Song of Ice and Fire books, both times I did look at the map a lot.
I have that Song of Ice and Fire map
it's really
of
cool.
Westeros in there. It's a Google map picture. It's great stuff. Anyway, back to this
Back to another nerd thing we like.
Qui-Gon reassures the flying seal? I don't know how to describe Watto. What would you say?
Gonzo from the Muppet Babies.
But worse. But weathered.
But old. Yeah. Gonzo from the Muppet Seniors.
Muppet Seniors.
They can barely walk.
Nanny's dead at this point.
Yeah, for sure. But they still talk to her.
It's just bones for her legs and the pants or skirt or whatever it is she wore. I don't remember.
I don't either, but I watched that a lot as a kid. Yeah, I did too.
Qui-Gon reassures him that he will have his money as soon as the race is over because guess what? This little boy that we met, the best. He's got so many M's.
Knowing about all the M's, Qui-Gon seems even more sure of himself that he's made the right call here.
Oh, yeah. And Watto says, he's pretty good. He's a testament to your race. I mean, not my race, the anti-Semitic stereotype of a Toydarian.
Yeah, Toydarian. I couldn't remember what they were called.
Anyway, I'm putting everything down on Sebulba. He's the best. That's my favorite thing that Watto does multiple times in this movie is go for too long.
It's a prolonged sigh that comes out more of a bathroom grunt.
Qui-Gon, who is annoyed at Watto, tells them, I'll take that bet. I'll wager my new pod against the boy and his mother. Watto huffs and puffs and says, no way. No pod racer is worth 2 slaves.
Yeah, seriously.
So Qui-Gon just goes, all right, find the boy. We'll just let his mother be a slave still.
Yeah, I mean, I've already established I am not here to free slaves. If I have said it once, I'll say it 1,000,000 times.
Watto waffles a bit and says, okay, let's let fate decide. He just so happens to have a chance cube here. He's going to roll it. If it turns up blue, it's the boy. Red, his mother. Or as Watto says, his mother. Watto tosses the cube and Qui-Gon, who always gets what he wants no matter what, uses his space wizard magic to make sure that cube comes up blue. It does. This, of course, incenses Watto, who's just surprised at this because this was obviously a loaded cube.
So they're both cheating at the same time, and that cube is not Toydarian. So Qui-Gon can do whatever he wants to it.
It doesn't even have a gut. Watto flitters off angrily. He just bitches the whole time.
Real quick, what's Sebulba doing during all this?
He's got his slaves, his 2 Twi'lek slaves, and, doesn't he lick his foot and stick it in her mouth or something?
He is totally just sprawled out getting a massage, which makes sense. You want to have your muscles loose.
To be honest, it's pretty hot.
Yeah, and Anakin's not getting that treatment. That's how you know Sebulba's really good.
Well, C-3PO can't do massages yet. His hands aren't quite finished.
This is like, how they always had, Tom Brady always had people massage him in a chair before he did his pod races?
Mm-hmm. That's how it works.
Like that.
Well, he won the Bootu race 4 times. If you couldn't tell, this podcast is going to be a bit long. So I'm always...
As is this pod race.
Yes, I'm always looking for areas we can skip a little bit, ignore some things, so that way, we can get to the good stuff. This was going to be one of them, this last little bit here. However, yet again, something so stupidly magnificent happened that I cannot ignore it. Here we go. As Watto leaves, Padme, Anakin, Shmi, and Anakin's friend Kitster arrive, and Kitster decides to tell his friend just how cool it is to be here.
This is so wizard, Annie. I'm sure you'll do it this time.
George Lucas, you've done it again?
I thought of it because I said it to myself when I wrote something down and thought it was good.
I guarantee he says wizard to himself.
This is so wizard.
Or, I guess...
to his horses on his ranch.
Here's the other option to that. George is so out of touch and he knows it. He's writing a script and he didn't want to write any of these scripts. He wanted someone else coming to do it, so he's kind of forced into doing it.
You know what? I'm glad he wrote these, though, because these are the last... there's a lot of money behind these, but now that Disney owns them, there's no guy whose personal stake in this is so great.
Oh, yeah. No, it's going to be a team of people from here on out.
And it's going to be carefully curated. And whatever you want to say, warts and all, this is a George Lucas thing, and that does give it a little more flavor in a way. A
little bit of charm at times. But what happened, I think, then, is he knew he needed to come up with a term, and he said, Katie Lucas, my daughter, or whoever, Jet Lucas, my son, that's real. What's a thing that people say? And the kid was asleep because it was late. and just garbled whatever word came out of his mouth. Happened to be wizard. Here we are.
And that's probably how most of the names of the characters were also decided upon.
But Padme did not bat a damn eye that Kitster said wizard as an adjective.
She's heard it before. Valorum says that shit.
So she instead focused on the last bit of what Kitster said, which was, I'm sure you'll do it this time. She inquires what exactly that means he's going to do, and Kitster says, we'll finish the race, of course.
And you have to think that Padme probably thought win. He's probably finished second a few times, something like that.
Nope. Anakin reveals it turns out he's never won a pod race. He's never finished one. He's only wrecked. And I don't know, to our knowledge, maybe he only did that one. This leaves Padme with her mouth agape in horror at what she's gotten herself into. Of course, Qui-Gon does not give one shit about this. He's not fazed in the least. And you know, I've long made the joke in my life that Qui-Gon looks like the Jedi that the rest of the council goes to for weed.
Yeah, he totally does.
And I think all of his, go with the flow mentality helps reinforce that concept. It makes more sense now.
And why he's like a little spiritual, but not like in a strict way, man. Like I just kind of follow it to its natural conclusion. Shmi, have you ever watched The Wall?
We get to see Darth Maul's spy orbs. They come floating around and they're just real noisy, which I'm assuming I would have to voice a complaint about because I don't like that repetitive beeping that they make.
It's really annoying and also not very discreet.
It has not found Qui-Gon yet, but it is getting close. So we're really running out of time here. Okay, it's time to get excited. We've got 4 hours of pod racing to recap. It's finally here. The stands are packed. The fans are screaming. The excitement is palpable, and we hear the familiar voice of Tatooine's best announcing duo, Foodsinbean Anadu.
Is this technically a duo?
Yeah, it's two sentient brains in one body.
Okay, all right.
And they each have a set of arms. Well, how did you think they...
What is this guy? What's he?
It's a Troig.
A Troig, okay. Again, really scraping the bottom of the name barrel here, George.
They are a two-headed, four-armed race of beings who, in this case, are tailor-made to be an announce team.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
And they are good at it.
They're pretty darn good at it. And they're voiced by Greg Proops, who is the English announcer. He's a comedian. He speaks basic, I should say. The other one was voiced by comedian Scott Capurro, who I did not recognize, but he's been in stuff.
I recognize Greg Proops much more from his Whose Line Is It Anyway work, of course.
Pretty distinct voice.
You got to give him his Proops for his work in this movie.
Initially, Lucas actually planned to use a blend of the comedians' faces that had makeup on and CGI. They couldn't quite get it to work, so they're now just full CGI.
And nobody has that Greg Proops like cone of hair. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
I don't know if he still has that.
I mean, he did at one point have very canonical
When
hair.
we were kids watching those Comedy Central reruns of Whose Line, he definitely had it.
Shortened to Fode and Bede, that's their names. You would call one head Fode, one head Bede. The duo acts as our tour guide as we navigate the just star-studded racing field, and they introduce us to the contenders. Well, this is a podcast, Brian, and I thought it's an audio medium. We really should try to paint the picture of our pod racers because it's a series of wacky pod racers.
And this is a big, significant chunk of the movie.
So what we're going to do here is go through them in order that Fodes and Bede introduce them and really just kind of give a description of what we think they look like. We'll see if we match up. Maybe we can paint that picture for our listeners. Yeah. So first off, we're introduced to Ben Quadinaros. We brought him up. He's awesome. One of the best Star Wars characters that's ever existed. I was going to say best pod racers in the Star Wars universe, but that didn't cover it.
No, you were right to expand that role.
So why don't you go first here? What do you think Ben Quadinaros looks like?
Sure. I think he's a bug with nostrils for some reason, which is unusual for an insect, whose wife is cheating on him right now.
Okay, yeah. I personally think that he looks like if you took, maybe George Clooney's charming looks, and then you took James Dean and his bad boy image, and you just mushed him into one handsome, daring package that would take the world by storm.
I think you mispronounced Timothy Spall, that British actor who plays the rat guy in Harry Potter.
What was the rat guy's name?
Why can't I think of
Silverfish.
Peter
Pettigrew.
Peter Pettigrew, yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's precisely what I meant. Next up, we have Bowles Roar. I think he looks like Gollum's fursona. What do you think he looks like?
Harry Warthog Gremlin.
Yeah. Sebulba's up next. We've met Sebulba, but I thought I would describe him as a sad dragon that forgot to eat for a few months, and it made him angry and mean.
Tall, but not too tall. ripped to the gills, which he may or may not have, sly but caustic sense of humor. You know he'll break your heart, but you also know you don't have a choice. His allure is simply too strong. You can tell he's good with his hands because he's an excellent wheelman. You can tell he has a way with words because of his clever turns of phrase. His dark side comes out when he senses victory slipping from his grasp, but you know you can change him. You know he'll change for you. That's kind of what I thought when I saw Sebulba.
I get it, kind of.
Yeah, just a general, I know I wasn't very
You weren't
specific.
very descriptive, but that's okay. No
That's
big
just how
deal.
I felt.
Next up, we have Mahonic. Why don't you go first on this one?
The three-eyed raven.
My mother-in-law. Just a big cow is what it is. That's the joke. And as a white person, I feel I'm obliged to say my mother-in-law
For some reason, it's in our blood, like midichlorians.
Next up is Clegg Holdfast, and I think he looks like if you took Admiral Nelson from the spiced rum, but then you took away all of his spiced rum and it made him less fun.
I'd like to really quickly say Clegg Holdfast is a cooler name than this guy looks.
Yes, very much so.
I had a turtle without a shell and with a weak chin. He has like no chin.
Dud Bolt is up next. I couldn't even say it. Dud Bolt is up next. Okay, Dud Bolt, what do you think, Brian?
Cool biker hippo with goggles. And I did have a side note here. I think this is a character George Lucas had a personal problem with to give him the name Dud Bolt. Like they'd argued before in his mind over breakfast.
He's been thinking of him for years and just developed a hatred of Dud Bolt.
I wish I could pull off goggles.
I think Dud Bolt looks like a crocodile horse with a leather fetish.
Similar kind of our
really.
assessments of Dud Bolt.
We have Odie Mandrell, and I couldn't quite get a grasp on a good way to describe Odie Mandrell, so I took to the internet for an answer.
Okay.
What I did is I ran an image of the pod racer through the image recognition app Hot Dog or Not, and it was determined that Odie Mandrell is not a hot dog.
Ah, okay. Well, I had a couple of descriptions for Odie Mandrell, strangely.
Good, that'll make up for my slack.
So one is, hey, what if Yoda was tall and ugly? And then the second one I have is the subject of derision in the music video for The Offspring's Pretty Fly for a White Guy. The guy's got kind of a bucket hat visor thing and some sunglasses. The style choices are similar.
Okay. And then lastly, we have Anakin Skywalker. What do you think Anakin Skywalker looks like?
Darth Vader.
I said noted child actor Jake Lloyd.
I did put on here, gives off the vibe he might cut off his own son's arm.
All right, well, as the event chugs along to a start, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that George Lucas gets a good fart joke in here. He has a mammalian beast called an Eopie, blast one out on the Jar Jar like the heroic beast that the Eopie is.
Which is probably the first time in Star Wars canon that it wasn't Jar Jar doing the farting. I want to talk a little bit about pod race history real quick.
Sure.
Which is a couple of factoids are bandied about here by our announce team. One is Bull's Roar is a 2-time champion.
He's good.
And Ben Quadraneros, as you said, is kind of bandied about as, I took it as like the veteran, you know he's going to go in the Hall of Fame, this guy. He's really good. He's still in his prime.
Yeah, but he's a little older. He's not a young
But he's not a young pup anymore. I gotta say, as much as I sometimes complain about unnecessary details George Lucas likes to put in, I like this. It gives it a little of a real sports feel, having some backstory to previous races, because the real sports feel is about to end.
Well, okay, of the ones we listed, and there are more, I just felt we should touch on the ones the movies touched on.
Yeah.
It's 2000, and you're sitting down to play your Nintendo 64. You just got back from the video rental store, probably Video Playhouse if you're me.
Yeah.
You've rented Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. I think that's what it's
Probably.
called. You know what I'm saying out there.
Oh, do I ever?
You sit down, choose your character. The list above is here. Who do you,
Sebulba.
Brian, want you? Who do you choose not Sebulba? And I'll say not Ben Quadraneros, because that's pretty obviously mine.
Yeah, that's definitely yours too. Okay. I think I think I'm gonna go ahead and take Clegg Holdfast.
Damn it. That was gonna be mine. So I'll shift and I'll say Dud Bolt.
Yeah, that's cool too.
I think most of these were in that game.
I think so too.
I didn't play it a whole lot.
I didn't play it a whole lot either, but we did rent it. I think you and I may have.
It's actually regarded as a really good racer to this day. When I was a kid, I didn't like it as much because it was very difficult and I just didn't have the interest to get invested in it. But now I get it. I understand it. While Jar Jar gets farted on, by the way, we notice that he's holding like a wrench or some sort of tool, and he's been working on the pod racer, and I just can't help but think, bad idea, right? Why did you give him a tool to help? Or is it the equivalent of giving like a kid a little plastic screwdriver and being like, no, unscrew the thing.
Here's something for you to do.
Yeah. Shmi gives a little bit of a pep talk to Anakin here and tells him to be safe. And meanwhile, Sebulba Crab walks his way over to Anakin's pod. He bends down a stabilizer and he says, uh-oh, and cackles as he does so, like a villain. It's not enough to sabotage the child's pod racer, however. He wanders over to Anakin and tells him, you're not walking away from this one. So he starts threatening
to kill him.
You slave scum.
And this is when you know Sebulba's a lot of flash, sure, but he's also actually evil. On top of like being kind of a little bit of a scumbag or whatever. And is this before or after he was kind of winking and blowing kisses to the crowd?
Pretty sure it's during, because that just continues for a bit. He hams it up, man. Yeah. He knows how to get the crowd on his side.
But then when he says this stuff in private, it is cutting and mean.
Anakin does, however, get the upper hand in this exchange. He calls Sebulba a Slimo, which is slime ball.
Yeah, it's a good thing I had the closed captioning on.
Of course, Sebulba is twirling his mustache with his feet at this moment, just in case you didn't know he was a bad guy. So we really want to hammer that home a bit. It's almost time to begin, so Qui-Gon comes to give Anakin some pointers and hoist him up onto the pod, and he tells him you need to concentrate on the moment and feel, don't think. Sending him off with the iconic line, may the Force be with you. However, Anakin has just met a Jedi for the first time in history, probably doesn't know what the Force is.
No.
So you think he's just sitting there like, okay, whatever, man.
He could have said, remember how I took your blood? You have a lot of midichlorians, and they're connected. He explains this whole thing like right before the pod race.
Here, read this book. It's the Encyclopedia of the Jedi. You know, the ancient Jedi text that Luke decides to destroy.
Yeah, it's on Encarta.
Just then, Fode and Bede pipe up, announcing the arrival of our heroic daimyo, Jabba the Hutt. Jabba slimes his way up to his balcony. He has a young, strapping Big Fortuna at his heel, I guess.
His base.
He tells the crowd, welcome, begin the race. If you look over Jabba's right shoulder here, you actually see another cool Hutt. He's enormous and sweaty. Next to that Hutt is a character called Diva Funkita, who's played by another George Lucas daughter, Amanda Lucas.
Wow, they're getting in here.
Yeah, he put them in all the prequels. The thrum of engines firing fills the air. Lightning bolts streak from engine to engine. We're treated to the sight of a dozen made-up monsters engaging knobs and switches as pit droids, crew members, flag bearers, they all leave the racing field. Qui-Gon arrives back at the luxury box where Padme and Shmi are waiting, and Padme immediately starts berating Qui-Gon, telling him how stupid this plan is.
Being right.
And he does the meanest thing. He bends down all the way to get eye to eye with Padme and says, the Queen trusts my judgment.
Which, okay, this is as much as I dislike Qui-Gon right here. He's totally Neeson-splaining to Padme about this stuff. But the funny part of it is that we, the audience, know she's the Queen. At the same time, he does look like a moron.
In one way, you can also interpret it as he does know, and he's just like, come on.
You
idiot.
Could, yeah.
So I don't know the answer to that
question.
I
don't think he knows, because repeatedly he uses that as like a get out of jail free card.
That's
of like,
true.
Don't question me, the Queen would be okay with it. Unless he's trying to tempt her into giving herself up.
Could be.
But I don't know.
I don't know. Whatever the Force is telling him.
My own count's too low. I don't know.
Next up in our children's movie, Jabba the Hutt bites the head off of a living Gorg as it screams in agony, and then he spits the head at a gong to signify the official start of the race.
Is this the same children's movie where the tendril mustache villain called a kid a slave scum?
That's the one.
Okay.
The pod racers blast into action. Well, most of them do anyway. Just as Anakin's racer starts to go, the engine cuts out. He stops dead in his tracks. Unfortunately, it's not just Anakin having trouble here. Noted sex icon and pod racing champion Ben Quadinaros is having trouble as well. In his rage, Quadinaros screams obscenities as his crew rushes out to start his pod, and as it happens, Anakin manages to get his vehicle fired up and active, bursting into high speed. Wish it was the other way around.
I know, me too. One thing about Ben Quadinaros is his face always looks kind of the same, whether he's mad or happy.
Doesn't have a neck.
The man's all cheeks.
Very big cheeks.
Yeah.
He's just a big face is what he is.
He is a big face.
Pretty hot.
I agree. Like Bull's roar is just a big hair tube on top of a much smaller body.
Now, long, boring action scenes like this are a bit rough to cover via audio, so for the most part, I'm going to summarize heavily here and there.
It is. It's a very boring sequence.
And I think most people will appreciate doing that. Like Anakin turns left a little, adjust, shifting to the right.
And there's only so many times you can say Sebulba laughs to himself and sabotages someone, although we will have to get into that.
Oh, I'll say it a few times at least. But what I do meant to mention here is Lucas was heavily influenced by a couple of things when it comes to this sequence in the pod race. The obvious one has been her, which there's the chariot race and cemented
in sand, no less.
That's true. So there's a little bit of that there, but there's also a Norwegian movie called Pinchcliff Grand Prix. It was a stop motion movie that is the most widely seen Norwegian film of all time. Came out, I believe, in 1975. There's a video out there actually showing scenes from that movie and the Phantom Menace side by side, and it is fascinating to watch because a lot of the scenes are equal. They're doing the same things.
Do you know if George Lucas paid anyone for that?
Oh, I'm certain he didn't. But it was one of those things that I'm sure he watched it and enjoyed it and was like, I think I'll make that my movie now. And then he did.
And there's a lot of that with George Lucas, for better or worse.
But go check that video out. It's really cool seeing the similarities between the two. I mean, it's even down to the point that two racers stall at the beginning. One's completely out. The other one has to fix something and then starts. I mean, crazy.
I always wonder when you go that granularly similar, how you can get away with it legally.
Maybe you can call it an homage, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe if you have enough money and the other person doesn't, it doesn't matter to anyone.
Well, I think there's a level because if you have enough money, they are going to want to sue you to get that money, but then it becomes so much money that you can just pay things you can just
to just stall out forever.
Bad things never happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, if I wanted to sum up the pod race here, I would just say Sebulba wrecks everyone.
That's why he's so good at it. It's not that he's really very good at racing. He's mean.
We actually witnessed him shaking his fist at Mahonic, who returns that shake in kind, and then Sebulba pushes him into a wall, forcing him to crash.
He shouldn't have returned that thing.
No. First off, one thing I want to cover is that Shmi, Padme, Qui-Gon, and Jar Jar are watching the events of the race on a space iPad and has bones on the side for handles.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Which is kind of amazing. It's like what you see in a Flintstones episode or whatever.
Yeah, like the Crypt Keeper got to pick out his iPad case or something.
At one point, with the racers speeding around the canyon, we're presented with a shot of the thickest bounty hunter you've ever seen. It's Aura Singh. She's the woman with the red outfit. She's got the weird antenna sticking out of her head, and she's watching the race. Now, Singh made appearances in the comics and the Clone Wars, and she was actually shown as someone training a young Boba Fett in one of the Clone Wars episodes. But she was evil. She was like, well, let's just kill whoever to get our money. And Boba, of course, as we learn, isn't quite that. So he ended up, I think, beating her up or something. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it. And we also heard of her mentioned in the movie Solo, where Tobias Beckett is played by Woody Harrelson. He's revealed to have killed her, or as he puts it, I pushed her. Pretty sure it was the fall that killed her. So a little toss in there.
Yeah, sounds like something Woody Harrelson would say.
We, of course, get to witness Tusken Raiders here, too, sitting on a hill. They're firing their guns.
In what might be the strangest part of a sanctioned sporting event, which is during part of the lap, you might be murdered by the locals.
Well, I can't help but feel that the Tusken Raiders are just stand-ins for Americans in the Deep South at this point, right down to their mighty Tusken elephant noises. Yeah. I hear those all the time here in the Missouri.
I know, which is also weird because most Tuskens are from Italy, so it's strange.
After the first lap, we're already down a few racers, including Rats Tyrell, who dies in a fiery explosion.
Because he hits a fucking stalactite.
Quadenaros continues to have equipment malfunctions. He's out too, and his various pod pieces explode and go flying every which way. Mahonic was, of course, crashed by Sebulba. And then although he completes a lap, Odie Mandrell's pod blows up during a pit stop when his comic relief robots fuck up. And pod racers are just dropping like flies at this point.
Yeah, somewhere in here also Jabba kills another animal for fun.
He flicks it off the thing.
Yeah, which is actually worse than the last murder, because he's not eating it even. There's no sustenance. He just murders it.
Our hero Anakin and our villain Sebulba, however, are still in this race at this point.
I think you reversed those.
Several times we get to see Anakin's pit crew, which includes Kitster, R2, a nude C-3PO, and Wald, and I can't help but think that that is a useless pit crew. R2 could do some stuff, I'm sure.
Why don't they borrow some of Odie Mandrell's awesome pit crew that they mention early? Don't they make a big point out of saying, like,
they were breaking records. They were so fast.
Like, that's his, he's got a really good pit crew. That's how he does well.
Except then one of the droids gets sucked into an engine. By the way, they show that droid pop out the other side of the engine unharmed. So they're like, we got to make sure the droid's okay. But let's kill these little frog creatures several times as they scream to death.
The screaming is probably the wrong decision for a kid's movie.
On the subject of the pit crew, though, I guess if there's a situation where you need something to be referred to as wizard, he's got a good pit crew for it.
Yeah.
Kitster's there.
That's true, yeah.
During lap 2, Sebulba once again sabotages a fellow racer, throwing a random junk part into the engine of Mars Guo, which caused the grimacing lizard to crash and burn. Following Guo's crash, Anakin has to avoid flying wreckage, and mostly does, except an errant piece of garbage smacks the coupling, attaching part of the cabin to the rest of the pod, which causes Anakin to spin violently behind the engines. He manages to eventually use one of those extending magnet things you use to grab screws when you drop them. He puts his pod back together, and he's in good shape.
Yeah, he's fine. Does that while driving. It's impressive.
It kind of is impressive. Tusken Raiders continue shooting at the racers, and although they narrowly miss Anakin, a shot does manage to hit Team Toe Pagali's racer, which causes him to crash and exit the race. This prompts Greg Proops to remark, "I don't care what universe you're from, that's gotta hurt."
I'm glad you made note of that too. Yeah, death does hurt. Getting shot hurts.
Well, he didn't die, to be fair.
Yeah, that's true.
Only the first one died. We're on to the third and final lap and told that Sebulba remains in the lead, but our heroic young bowl cut has made it all the way into second. On the first leg of the lap, Sebulba tries his best to crash young Anakin, smashing him into a service ramp, which launches Anakin high into the air, but Skywalker pushes some levers and boom, he's in front of Sebulba, now in first place. I don't know how it works.
I don't either. I was going to ask, but you just answered. You also don't know.
This pisses off the angry Doug even more, so Sebulba pushes his pod as fast as he can to try and push Anakin's cabin through the lightning bolts on the front of his racer. We see the part which Sebulba sabotaged before the race beginning to rock violently, and it's pretty clear that it's about to fall off. Eventually it does, and this powers Anakin's pod down enough to allow Sebulba to take the lead, and it even causes an engine to burst into flames for Anakin.
I guess.
Now, there's an awful lot of wiggling things and plugging stuff into other stuff. Eventually, Anakin restores power to his racer. He bursts forward, and entering the final stretch, manages to get side by side with Sebulba. The Doug gets mad about this and tries to ram his pod into Anakin's, but their two vehicles get tangled up in one another, and they cannot manage to break free. Sebulba pulls his steering knob hard to the left to disengage Skywalker, and just as he does, Anakin pushes forward to max the throttle.
Turbo nitrous is his ass.
This causes Sebulba's pod to violently whip away from Skywalker's, and he crashes right into a rock pile while Anakin races to the finish line. Now, the victor of the Boonta Eve Classic. The crowd goes wild. Wald and Kitster awkwardly try to high-five one another, and the young racer is lifted 15 feet in the air by what I assume is the second tallest Jedi that has ever existed, Qui-Gon Jinn. First tallest? Count Dooku, because, Christopher Lee's huge.
Oh, is he taller than Liam Neeson?
Pretty sure. I think Christopher Lee's 6'5" or 6. Liam Neeson's my height.
So he's narrowly
6'4",
got him.
Just a little bit.
Too bad they didn't get 6'7" James Cromwell in here.
If you know what? Star Wars is still moving forward. Maybe
James
we get him in there.
Cromwell's still kicking and still doing good work.
He's out there sitting on a counter at Starbucks protesting the cost of non-dairy milk.
That's right, he is.
Good for him.
He's out there being a grandpa on Secession who would do that in the context of the show also.
Well, with the pod race victory in tow, that's it for the Phantom Menace Part 1.
It's not it for the Phantom Menace, though.
There's a lot more. We'll be back next week with all that stuff as we cover the rest of the movie. But before we get out of here, just chat a little bit about what you should be doing now that you know who we are. We have other shows here on the Bootu Inc. podcast network where I think you should check out the Boob2 Boys, which we've mentioned in the past. That's a podcast that Brian and I host alongside our friend Spencer. And actually, to celebrate the release of this show, we're covering the Kenobi episodes 1 and 2. On the Boob2 Boys, so check that out. That'll be a lot of fun,
if you're listening to this, you'll want to hear us do that. And it'll be a lot different, too, in a sense that Spencer doesn't know as much about stuff that doesn't need to be in a man's brain as we do.
He has not wasted as much time as we have on this property.
He's probably learning useful information while we're learning about Ben Quadraneros.
You know Spencer, too. You know it's not useful. It's just not the same information.
It's a different kind of useless information than Ben Quadraneros' backstory.
As always, leave a rate and review on our shows on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you can. We appreciate that, and that gets us some more views and listens. Tell your friends about us. It's great. We would love that. Get some more listeners on here. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at Manly Van Lee. Brian, you are
at Loud Guitar Brian.
And then finally, if you really like what we do, patreon.com/Bootu Inc. Head over there. We have everything for free. You don't even have to spend any money to get the bonus content. We have bonus pods. We have all kinds of stuff on there. But while you're there, if you like us, leave us a couple of bucks.
Yeah.
We'd appreciate it. Helps keep the show going. I can put more production into it. It's awesome.
And if you don't have the money, we get it. But do what Van said before. Go rate and review us and stuff. That's great too.
That's right. And then the last thing I want to say here is I want to send out a special thanks. So I get this out there. There's a Reddit board called Maw Installation, M-A-W Installation. And this subreddit is full of hardcore Star Wars nerds. I have been a lurker there for a while. I may have posted once or twice, but I get a lot of my information from there, and I just appreciate it because it's a nice community. If you go to...
Oh, man, that is... Nice online communities are rare, so hold on to that.
If you go to r/Star Wars, it's somewhat okay, but it still gets pretty nasty at times, like most of the internet does. But Maw Installation... Great stuff. And I believe the Maw Installation was Tarkin, Grand Moff Tarkin's secret research organization.
I'm surprised I wasn't notified about that as a Grand Moff.
But you weren't.
But I wasn't.
It's canonical. You're a Grand Moff.
I'd like to say I'm really excited to get into the second half of this movie because this is when it becomes political thriller.
We get to see Nute Gunray again.
Yes,
it's been a while.
It actually, I kind of miss him.
But what do you feel about Rune?
I don't miss Rune. I think Rune is there to be the yes man to Nute Gunray.
You also never remember his name, so it's pretty clear how you feel about Rune.
Yeah, it's probably how Nute feels about him from how he treats him.
Well, that's it. So check out the episode next week when we finish off the Phantom Menace. But from here to there, what's that Star Wars phrase? May Jar Jar's face always be within you.
Whoever's got the most midichlorians wins.
That's the one.